At 8 o'clock, on the last evening of the Marchmont House party in Hampshire, England, in the year 8 Lord Felix Arundell looked across a dinner table glittering with silver, candlelight, and 23 witnesses pointed his small spoon at Miss Margot Selwyn and said, "Mamma, can I sit by you instead?" The silence that followed was so complete that Margot heard a drop of wax fall from the nearest taper. Lady Cressida Arundell, Duchess of Bellhaven, Felix's mother, by blood and by law, sat directly opposite in pale blue silk, her gloved hand frozen beside her wineglass. The Earl of Marchmont lowered his fork. Lady Marchmont gave one quick, frightened smile that found no place to land. Around the table, viscounts, ambitious mothers, unmarried daughters, and 2 elderly ladies with excellent hearing turned their faces first toward the child, then toward Margot, then toward the Duchess. It was not the sort of mistake a little boy was permitted to make in a house like this. Not before guests, not before servants, not before a duke. Alexander Arundell, Duke of Bellhaven, had been standing near the sideboard in quiet conversation with his host when his son's voice cut through the polished murmur of the room. He did not move at once. That stillness made Margot more afraid than any sudden anger could have done. He was a tall man in black evening dress, severe, controlled, and powerful enough that even silence seemed to obey him. Margot had heard of him before she had ever seen him. Every woman at Marchmont House had. Cold Bellhaven, some called him Proud Bellhaven, a man who had inherited Ravenmere Abbey too young and had smiled too rarely ever since. His rank placed him above everyone in the room except royalty, but his eyes, when they moved from Felix to Margot, did not look careless with power. They looked precise. They looked as if he had noticed something before he had decided what it meant. Margot felt the heat rise from her collarbone to her throat, though she had done nothing wrong. She was only the poor relation at the lower end of the table, invited because her late mother had once been Lady Marchmont's dearest friend. She was useful in small ways. She wrote neat place cards, made conversation with elderly guests, soothed awkward silences, and knew how to move aside before anyone had to ask. At 29, with one good gown turned twice and a pearl necklace made of clever paste, she had long ago perfected the art of being grateful without becoming visible. But no woman remained invisible after a duke's son called her mamma. Lady Cressida set down her wineglass with a soft click. Her smile was beautiful. That made it worse. "Felix," she said, "you are confused." The boy's spoon lowered. He was 5 years old, pale from a recent fever, with dark hair falling into his eyes, and the wary composure of a child who had already learned that adults preferred him quiet. Margot had met him only that afternoon in the long gallery, where he had stood before a portrait with a wooden horse hidden under one arm. The little horse had a scratched flank, one loose leg, and a brave painted eye. Felix had asked whether people inside portraits knew when they were missed. Margot had not laughed. She had knelt on the hard floor, though the marble chilled her knees through her gown, and told him portraits were not cages. They were doors memory sometimes opened. Then she had dusted the wooden horse with her handkerchief and given it back, without asking why he clutched it, as if someone might take it away. That was all. One small kindness. Nothing society would record. Everything a lonely child might remember. Now the same horse lay beside Felix's plate, half hidden beneath his napkin. Its loose leg jutted oddly over the white cloth. Margot noticed the Duke notice it. His gaze dropped to the horse, then to her folded handkerchief in her lap, where a faint mark of gallery dust still stained one corner. His eyes moved next to Felix's wrist. Margot had seen the mark there in the gallery, a narrow red pressure line almost concealed by the cuff of his little evening coat. She had not asked about it. A frightened child deserved privacy before questions, but she had not forgotten. Neither, it seemed, had the Duke once he saw where her eyes had gone. "Miss Selwyn," Lady Marchmont whispered at. Margot's right, her voice tight beneath its hostess sweetness. "Perhaps you might assure Lord Felix he has mistaken you. It would have been the safest thing." Margot knew safe answers. She had spent years speaking them in drawing rooms where poor women survived, by making comfortable people more comfortable. She could say, of course he was mistaken. She could laugh softly. She could return the Duchess's child to the Duchess's dignity, and herself to the shadows. But Felix looked at her with a hope so desperate that denying him felt like placing a stone upon something already bruised. Lord Felix knows I am Miss Selwyn, Margot said gently. She kept her hands folded so no one would see them tremble. He is not confused, he is tired. A murmur moved down the table. It was a dangerous answer because it accused no one and yet refused to lie. Lady Cressida's eyes sharpened. How generous of you to interpret my child for me. Not interpret, Your Grace. Only spare him embarrassment. Children are embarrassed when strangers encourage nonsense. The Duchess turned her smile toward the guests, inviting them into agreement. Felix apologized to Miss Selwyn. The boy's mouth opened. No sound came. His fingers found the wooden horse and tightened until his knuckles paled. Margot saw his shoulders rise toward his ears. She also saw the Duke's face change by almost nothing at all. A faint stillness entered him, colder than anger and far more controlled. Felix, the Duke said. His voice was quiet. The room obeyed it. Come here. The child slid from his chair at once, but he did not go to his mother. He crossed behind 2 footmen and stopped beside his father, pressing himself against the severe black line of the Duke's coat. Lady Cressida gave a little laugh, bright and brittle. You see? He is overtired. He has been indulged. By whom? The Duke asked. Nothing in his tone rose, but the Duchess's smile thinned. By everyone, apparently. Not by Miss Selwyn, Felix whispered. It was the wrong moment for truth. Children often possessed that terrible gift. The whole room seemed to lean nearer. Margot looked down at her plate, wishing the polished floor might open beneath her chair and make her blessedly unimportant again. The Duke looked at his son. What did Miss Selwyn do? Felix hesitated. His eyes flicked toward his mother. Lady Cressida lifted her glass and drank as if bored. She said valor was brave, the boy murmured. A few guests smiled with relief, eager to make the matter harmless. Felix continued so softly the words nearly failed. And she didn't say, brave boys don't cry. The smiles disappeared. Margot felt the sentence move through the room like cold air through a cracked window. She had not meant that private kindness to be dragged beneath chandeliers. It had belonged to the gallery, to a child's grief, to the hush beneath painted ancestors where nobody was performing. Lady Cressida set her glass down. How touching. Miss Selwyn has known my son for half a day and already presumes to improve his character. Margot lifted her head. She had endured many small humiliations in her life. She had been seated near doors, forgotten in introductions, praised for being sensible when no one cared to call her lovely. She had heard cousins discuss her future as if she were a parcel requiring storage. She knew the correct response: apologize, shrink, make the powerful comfortable. But Felix was standing beside his father, waiting to learn whether kindness was something shameful. No, Your Grace, Margot said. I would never presume to improve him. I found him already kind. Lady Marchmont gave the faintest gasp. Someone near the foot of the table whispered, Good heavens. Lady Cressida's expression remained composed, but colour rose beneath her powder. The Duke's gaze rested on Margot, not with idle curiosity, not with the careless assessment men often gave women of small fortune, but as though she had become evidence. Margot knew what would happen now. By breakfast, half the house would decide she was impertinent. By luncheon, the other half would say she had encouraged a vulnerable child to attach himself to her. By the end of the week, her aunt in Bath would receive a letter advising that Miss Selwyn had overreached. Women without fortune were rarely allowed tenderness without motive. The Duke stepped away from the sideboard and came to the table. Every gentleman half rose, uncertain whether ceremony required it, but Bellhaven ignored them. He stopped behind Margot's chair. She felt his presence before she heard him, a controlled force that altered the air around her. Miss Selwyn, he said, you will forgive the disorder at my table, not Lady Cressida's. Not even Marchmont's, though they sat in Marchmont House. His correction was subtle, and every guest heard it. Margot looked up, startled by the protection hidden inside the formality. "There is nothing to forgive, Your Grace. There is always something to forgive when a child is made afraid to speak kindly." Lady Cressida went perfectly still. The Duke reached down, not touching Margot, and lifted the fallen corner of her marked handkerchief from the edge of the chair where it had slipped. He folded it once, and placed it beside her plate, with the care another man might have given a jewel. "Felix," he said, "you may sit beside Miss Selwyn for the remainder of dinner, provided she permits it. Permission. Not command, not assumption." In a room eager to make Margot either culprit or servant, he had asked whether she chose. Felix looked at her with a hope so naked it hurt. Margot smiled at him, small and steady. "I should be honored, Lord Felix." A footman moved the chair. Silver shifted. Society rearranged itself around a woman it had not meant to see. Across the table, Lady Cressida watched with a calm so polished it reflected nothing, but her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. The Duke saw that too. Margot was certain of it. Felix climbed into the chair beside her and placed Valor between their plates. Its loose wooden leg tapped once against the china. He whispered, "I'm sorry." I didn't mean to make her angry. Margot kept her voice low enough for him alone. "Kindness is not a mistake," the Duke heard. His gaze moved from Felix to Margot, and for one suspended moment the noise of knives, whispers, and candle flames seemed to fall away. Something had begun, not romance, not yet. Something more dangerous in a house full of watching eyes, recognition. And at the far end of the table, Lady Cressida smiled as if she had just decided Miss Margot Selwyn would not remain at Marchmont House long enough to be called anything at all. Dessert had not yet been carried from the dining room when Margot understood that society could forgive almost anything except a truth spoken by a child before witnesses. The ladies withdrew to the drawing room in a rustle of silk, lace, and injured curiosity, leaving the gentlemen to their port, and the servants to pretend they had heard nothing. By the time Margot crossed the threshold behind Lady Marchmont, she had already become 3 different stories. To Lady Fenton, she was a poor relation who had forgotten her place. To Miss Aurelia Vane, she was a spinster clever enough to make use of a lonely heir. To the Dowager Countess near the fire, she was simply unfortunate, which in polite society often meant guilty without proof. Margot accepted a cup of tea she did not want, and took her place near the pianoforte, not hidden, not central, but in that careful middle distance women, without consequence, learned to occupy. Her handkerchief lay folded in her lap, the dusty corner concealed beneath her thumb. She could still feel the weight of the Duke's gaze from dinner, the impossible steadiness of it, and the way he had asked for her permission, as if the wishes of a poor woman deserved public shape. That small courtesy should have comforted her. Instead, it frightened her because a thing once recognized could later be taken away. Lady Cressida entered last. A duchess never needed to hurry. The room made space for her because rank had a way of moving furniture, conversation, and courage. She wore the same pale blue silk, though now Margot noticed a narrow snag along one cuff, almost invisible unless one knew where to look. The Duchess saw Margot see it. Her smile arrived a breath later. "Miss Selwyn," she said, soft enough to sound kind to anyone not listening carefully. "You must be exhausted after such an unusual display." Margot set down her cup. "Not particularly, Your Grace. How fortunate." Most women would find it distressing to be placed in so delicate a position. Most women would find Lord Felix's distress more important than the position. The nearest fan stopped moving. Lady Marchmont's eyes widened in silent warning. Margot knew she had stepped past safety, but the memory of Felix's hand tightening around Valor's loose wooden leg held her steady. Lady Cressida came closer, her perfume cool and floral. There is a reason women of uncertain standing are advised to keep to safer subjects. Music, weather, embroidery. Children of ducal houses are not among them. Margot felt the old lessons rise in her throat. Apologize. Smile. vanish. Poverty trained a woman more thoroughly than any governess could. It taught her to make herself light enough to carry and easy enough to dismiss. But Felix had watched her at dinner, as if the room itself would decide whether kindness was punishable. Then perhaps children of ducal houses should be kept safe enough that no one needs to speak, she said. A faint sound moved through the drawing room. It was not quite a gasp. It was the collective breath of people who had come to observe a woman ruined and had discovered she might object to it. Lady Cressida's eyes hardened. Lady Marchmont, I believe Miss Selwyn is unwell. Lady Marchmont rose at once, grateful for any explanation that promised order. Yes, yes, perhaps a little rest would be wise. Margot, my dear, this has been a trying evening. The kindness beneath the dismissal did not make it less a dismissal. Margot curtsied because manners were armor, and hers, though worn, still served. Of course. She moved toward the door with every gaze pressing between her shoulder blades. She had nearly reached the corridor when Lady Cressida's voice followed her, pitched low enough to seem private and clear enough to wound. Some women mistake a child's loneliness for a ladder. Margot stopped. Her fingers tightened once around the marked handkerchief. A reckless answer rose in her, bright and dangerous. She swallowed it. There were battles a woman won by speaking, and there were battles she won by refusing to bleed where others could applaud. She walked out. The corridor beyond the drawing room was panelled in dark oak, lit by wall sconces that set long shadows over the carpet. Margot meant to return to her chamber, lock the door, and decide whether dignity required departure before breakfast. She had only one trunk, 2 serviceable gowns, and an aunt in Bath, whose own security was thin as old paper. If Lady Cressida wrote first, Margot's explanation would arrive too late. That was how women without shelter were moved. Not with violence, with letters, with hints, with hosts who called removal kindness. She had gone less than 60 feet when she heard a small sound from the gallery beyond the staircase. A child trying not to cry. Margot turned before prudence could stop her. Felix was crouched beneath a portrait of a Marchmont ancestor in military dress. Valor clutched so tightly beneath his arm that the toy's loose leg tapped faintly against a button on his coat. One evening shoe had come undone. His cravat had shifted as if he had tugged at it while running. Lord Felix, Margot said gently. He startled so sharply guilt passed through her. It is only me. I wasn't hiding. No, of course not. She sat on the edge of a carved bench, leaving room between them. You were inspecting the carpet at close range. A tiny breath escaped him. It was nearly a laugh, though too small to become one. Papa will be cross. Did he say so? Felix shook his head. Mama will. The word sounded different here than it had at dinner. Not a claim. A warning. Margot kept her voice quiet. Your father asked where you wished to sit. That made it worse. For whom? The boy did not answer. He rubbed Valor's chipped ear with his thumb. Margot looked at the horse. He has a very brave face. Felix held it closer. Nurse Pruitt said Valor keeps secrets for brave boys. The name came like a key turned in a lock. Margot did not reach for it too quickly. Nurse Pruitt sounds as though she knew him well. She knew all his battles. And yours? Felix's mouth trembled. She went away. Did she say goodbye? He shook his head. That was answer enough. Children might forget a sermon, a party, or a new coat. They did not forget being left without farewell by the person who had held them through fever. Margot unfolded her handkerchief and offered the clean edge. Valor may borrow this again if he has been in battle tonight. Felix looked at it, then at her. Will you want it back, when Valor no longer needs it? He took it with careful hands and began to wrap the little horse. As he worked, the loose front leg shifted under the fabric. Something in the joint clicked faintly. Felix froze. It does that sometimes, he whispered. Nurse Pruitt said not to pull it. She said some brave things have places where secrets sleep. Margot's pulse changed. Did she? But I don't know what she meant. Footsteps sounded near the staircase. Margot rose at once, but it was not Lady Cressida. The Duke of Bellhaven emerged from the shadow, his evening coat severe, his expression unreadable. Felix went still. That stillness struck Margot harder than tears would have done. The Duke saw it. He stopped several yards away. "Felix," he said, and there was no anger in his voice. "I have been looking for you. I'm sorry, Papa." "For what?" Felix blinked as if the question had no proper answer. "For making dinner wrong." The Duke's face altered by the smallest degree. Margot was beginning to understand that his restraint was not emptiness. It was a locked room with something alive inside. "You did not make dinner wrong," he said. "Adults did." Felix looked at Margot as if seeking proof that such a thing might be true. She gave the smallest nod. The Duke's gaze moved to Vala, wrapped in her handkerchief, then to Felix's wrist. This time Margot was certain he noticed the fading pressure mark near the cuff. A muscle tightened along his jaw. "Go to Mr. Hales," he said. "He is waiting near the nursery stairs." Felix did not move. "Will Miss Selwyn be sent away?" The question landed with the force of a dropped glass. Margot opened her mouth, but no answer came. The Duke looked at her, and for the first time that evening, his authority seemed to bend toward appeal. "Miss Selwyn has not yet told me her wishes." Felix frowned, but grown people don't ask ladies like her what they wish. Margot felt the sentence enter her with painful precision. Ladies like her. Dependent, useful, allowed opinions only when they cost nothing. The Duke's eyes darkened. "Then grown people have been discourteous." Felix accepted this with solemn difficulty, then slipped past. His father toward the nursery stairs, Vala held against his chest beneath the borrowed handkerchief. When he had gone, the corridor seemed larger and far less safe. Margot folded her hands before her. "Your Grace, I apologize for any inconvenience I have caused your household. That sounds rehearsed. Women in my position rehearse many apologies. Did you encourage my son to call you anything improper?" "No." "Did you speak against the Duchess to him?" "No." "Did you see the mark on his wrist?" Margot went still. The question was quiet. It was also a door. Once opened, it would not close without conscience trapped inside. "Yes, when?" "This afternoon in the gallery. Why did you not report it?" "To whom should I have reported it, Your Grace? His mother? My hostess?" "A servant who might lose his place for repeating concern from a woman with none." I had known Lord Felix for minutes. I had no standing. I had suspicion. The truth stripped the air between them. Margot expected offense. Men of rank rarely enjoyed being reminded that power did not always see what stood 5 feet away. Instead, the Duke looked toward the nursery stairs with severity turned inward. "You had more than suspicion at dinner. At dinner I had fear." "His?" "Yes." A pause. "And yours?" Margot looked away. "That was too near." "My fear is of no consequence." "I disagree." The words unsettled her, more than flattery could have done. Before she could answer, a maid appeared at the end of the corridor, pale with discomfort. She curtsied and held out a folded note. "From Her Grace, Your Grace." The Duke opened it. He read only once. Margot watched his expression close, not with surprise, but with confirmation. "Thank you. You may go." The maid vanished. The Duke folded the note and placed it inside his coat. "My wife has requested that Lady Marchmont send you away before breakfast." There it was. Swift, elegant, predictable. Margot's throat tightened. "I see. Do you? Clearly." "I have embarrassed a duchess, unsettled a dinner party, and become inconvenient in a house where I was never meant to matter." The Duke stepped closer, stopping at a respectful distance. "You have also told the truth twice, when silence would have served you better. Silence usually serves everyone else." For a moment, neither of them spoke. From the drawing room came a spill of laughter, bright and false, as if nothing in the house had cracked. "Lady Marchmont mentioned needing help with correspondence and place cards before Friday's assembly," he said. Margot almost smiled. "Lady Marchmont mentions many domestic tragedies. Misplaced ribbons, inadequate violets. A shortage of sensible cousins. Then one of her tragedies may become useful. Your Grace, a reason must be proper enough to protect me, not merely convenient enough to keep me." His gaze sharpened. He understood at once. That mattered more than it should have. "You will assist Lady Marchmont in the morning room," he said. "Open doors, chaperones. My son may attend for 1 hour, if his nurse." permits it, and if his nurse refuses, then I will ask why a child may not sit in a room with 3 adults and a pile of harmless place cards. Margot looked toward the stairs. Nurse Pruitt would have understood him. The Duke's face changed. You know that name. Felix told me she gave him valor. She left Ravenmere 6 months ago. Left? That is what I was told. By her grace, through the housekeeper, through my wife. Margot said nothing, but the silence had a conscience. The Duke heard it. Miss Selwyn, he said, I will not ask you to spy. Good. I will ask you to remember that may be worse. Why? Because memory has a conscience. Something almost like warmth moved through his eyes, brief and dangerous, because it made him seem less like rank and more like a man. Then I have asked the right person. Margot should have refused. Safety stood only 1 staircase away, in a chamber where she could pack before dawn and become a footnote in someone else's scandal. But Felix had asked whether she would be sent away, and the fear in his voice had been older than one dinner. If I stay, she said, I will not be used to provoke the Duchess. You have my word. Nor placed near Lord Felix in any manner that invites gossip. Agreed, and if I leave, it will be because I choose it. The Duke bowed his head slightly, as if the choice of a poor woman deserved. Ceremony. Agreed. Margot drew a slow breath. Then I will not pack tonight. At that, something in his face eased, not enough for anyone else to have called relief, but enough for her to see. Lock your door, he said. Do you expect danger from a note? I expect discomfort from a woman denied her will. That is not danger. In drawing rooms, it is often close enough. Margot curtsied. Good night, Your Grace. She had gone several paces when he spoke again. You told my son kindness is not a mistake. She turned yes, his voice lowered. I hope you believe that for yourself. She could not answer without revealing how long she had treated her own tenderness as a foolish expense. So she went upstairs with her hand steady on the rail. Lady Cressida's threat behind her, Felix's trust ahead of her, and Valor's strange little secret, sleeping inside a wooden leg no one yet dared to open. Morning arrived with pale Hampshire light and the efficient cruelty of breakfast. Margot had slept less than 2 hours, though she had lain still the entire night with her door locked, her trunk untouched, and Lady Cressida's threat moving through her thoughts like a letter already sealed. By 8:30, Marchmont House looked innocent again. Sunlight touched the breakfast-room windows. Silver urns steamed beside covered dishes, toast cooled beneath folded napkins. The servants moved with that perfect quiet which always made a household seem orderly, even when disorder had merely learned to whisper. Margot entered in her plain grey morning gown, the least memorable dress she owned, and felt the room change before anyone spoke. Lady Fenton's conversation softened. Miss Aurelia Vane lowered her teacup. Lady Marchmont, seated behind the tea-tray, wore the expression of a hostess who had been awake since dawn, trying to persuade herself that hospitality could survive a duchess's displeasure. Lady Cressida sat near the window in dove-coloured silk, fresh and composed, as if no child had trembled at dinner, no note had been sent in the corridor, and no poor relation had been marked for removal. Before breakfast, Margot curtsied first to her hostess. Good morning, Lady Marchmont. Good morning, my dear. Lady Marchmont's smile fluttered and failed. I trust you slept well. Well enough, thank you. It was a harmless lie. Harmless lies were the oil of English breakfast tables. Margot waited for a chair to be indicated. None was. A footman shifted, then looked toward Lady Marchmont, who looked toward Lady Cressida, who looked only at her plate. It was a small punishment, elegant enough to deny. Margot remained, standing beside the lower end of the table, hands folded, posture straight, feeling each second become visible. Lady Cressida lifted a folded letter from beside her coffee cup. How fortunate that you are down before the post is sent. Margot looked at the letter and knew. Her aunt's house in Bath seemed suddenly very far away, a narrow place of lavender sachets, careful economies, and anxieties folded between old linens. Your Grace, I have spared Lady Marchmont an awkward conversation. The Duchess turned the letter once between her gloved fingers. I have written to your aunt. She will be relieved to know you are returning today. Lady Marchmont made a faint sound, almost a protest, but it did not become one. The others looked down with the bright discomfort of people who wish to witness humiliation without being seen enjoying it. Margot felt the old terror rise. Not loud, not childish. The adult kind of fear that knew how quickly shelter could be withdrawn from women who owned none. One letter from a duchess could make her an inconvenience in Bath before she ever arrived there. That was considerate, Margot said. Her voice sounded calmer than she felt. But unnecessary. Lady Cressida's brows lifted. Unnecessary? I have not decided to leave. The room went still. Miss Vane's teacup paused halfway to its saucer. Lady Marchmont's hand tightened around the handle of the silver pot. Lady Cressida smiled. My dear Miss Selwyn, one does not always decide such things. Sometimes one is guided by those better placed to judge. Margot touched the back of the nearest chair, not to claim it, only to steady herself. I have been guided most of my life, Your Grace. I am not convinced it has improved me. The silence sharpened. Lady Fenton inhaled. Miss Vane looked delighted and horrified in equal measure. Lady Cressida set the letter down beside her plate. Careful, one word, soft, intimate, ugly. Margot felt the warning settle across the table like frost. She could still retreat. She could say fatigue had made her foolish. She could apologize and let herself be folded into the day's post like any other troublesome paper. Instead, she thought of Felix's solemn face in the corridor and his question, "Will Miss Selwyn be sent away?" "I am being careful," Margot said. "That is why I am still here," Lady Marchmont whispered. "Margot, it was not quite a reprimand. It was fear wearing her name." Before Lady Cressida could answer, the door opened, and the Duke of Bellhaven entered with Felix at his side. Every person rose or half rose. Margot saw at once that Felix had not slept well either. His hair had been brushed too severely, his cravat tied with nursery precision, and Valor was tucked beneath one arm, half wrapped in Margot's handkerchief from the night before. The loose wooden leg shifted as he walked, clicking faintly against a button on his small coat. His eyes searched the room and stopped when they found Margot standing without a chair. The Duke saw that too. His face did not change. That made the correction more dangerous when it came. "Lady Marchmont," he said, "may I impose upon your hospitality for a practical arrangement?" Lady Marchmont looked as if she would agree to having the roof removed if he asked with enough calm. "Of course, Bellhaven. Miss Selwyn has kindly consented to assist you with correspondence and place cards for Friday's assembly." Lady Marchmont blinked. Then memory, gratitude, and rank arranged themselves into agreement. "Yes, yes, indeed. I am quite overwhelmed by them. Lord Felix," the Duke continued, "has developed an interest in quiet rooms, wooden horses, and sensible company. He may attend the morning room for 1 hour, with open doors and proper supervision, if Miss Selwyn and you permit it." Felix looked at Margot with a hope that tried very hard not to show. Lady Cressida gave a soft laugh. How generous of Miss Selwyn to consent before her hostess asked. "Lady Marchmont did ask," the Duke replied, "at dinner." She mentioned the place cards twice. Lady Marchmont nodded too quickly. "I did. I certainly did." The Duchess's gaze moved to Margot. "And you believe Miss Selwyn suitable?" The Duke crossed to the empty chair beside Margot and drew it out himself. A footman hurried forward too late, then stopped in embarrassment. The gesture was small. Its meaning was not. A duke had made visible what the room had tried to deny her, a place. "I believe Miss Selwyn has already proved more suitable than most," he said. Margot sat because refusing would insult the protection he had made respectable. Felix slipped into the chair on her other side before anyone could stop him. He placed Valor between his plate and hers with grave ceremony. The loose leg tapped the china once. He winced, then pressed the toy steady with both hands. "He does that sometimes," he whispered. "The clicking?" Margot asked softly. He nodded. Nurse Pruitt said not to mend him unless he asked. "Did Valor ask?" Felix studied the horse as if the matter required real consultation. "Not yet." Across the table, Lady Cressida's mouth tightened. The Duke, who had taken a chair opposite them rather than returning to the sideboard, heard every word. Margot knew it from the way his eyes moved briefly to the toy's leg and then to Felix's hand. Breakfast proceeded in fragments. Lady Fenton attempted to discuss the weather and abandoned it. Miss Vane asked whether Bath was pleasant in spring, then smiled when Margot did not answer. Lady Marchmont poured tea into the wrong cup. Lady Cressida ate nothing. The Duke spoke only when Felix hesitated before reaching for toast. "You may have it," he said. Felix looked startled. "I may?" "Yes, even if I drop crumbs, especially then." Crumbs are proof that breakfast occurred. Felix considered this, then took the toast. The smallest smile touched his mouth. It vanished when Lady Cressida said, "His appetite is often improved by an audience." Margot saw the boy's shoulders rise. Before she could speak, the Duke set down his cup. Cressida, only her name, it was enough. The Duchess looked at him across the table, and for a moment husband and wife seemed to speak in a language built from old resentments no one else could hear. Lady Cressida smiled first. "Of course. I am delighted he eats." Nobody believed her. The door opened again. Mr. Hale stood on the threshold, grave and carefully expressionless. He bowed to the Duke. "Your Grace, forgive the interruption. The East Lumber Room has been opened as you requested." Lady Cressida's hand stilled beside her knife. Felix stopped chewing. Margot felt the change in him before she saw it. His small body went rigid, and his fingers closed around Valor so tightly that the loose leg clicked once more beneath the handkerchief. The Duke turned his head, and Hales glanced toward the child, then back to his master. "The old nursery box from Ravenmere Abbey has been found." The word box seemed to empty the air around Felix. His lips parted, but he made no sound. Lady Cressida recovered first. "Old nursery rubbish," she said lightly. How odd that anyone would disturb Lady Marchmont's servants over toys and moth-eaten linen. "It bears Felix's name," Hales said. His voice remained respectful. "The brass plate is scratched but readable." Lady Marchmont murmured, "Oh dear." The Duke's gaze went to his son. "Felix, do you know the box?" Felix nodded once. "It was in my old room, at Ravenmere." Another nod. "Nurse Pruitt said baby things remember before boys can." Lady Cressida sighed. "Servants do love making poetry out of dust." Margot saw Felix flinch, as if the sentence had touched something tender. She set one finger on the table near Valor, not touching the boy, not claiming his fear, only offering nearness. "Some things are worth keeping," she said quietly. Felix looked at her. "Even if they make people cross, especially if someone grows cross before knowing what they are." Lady Cressida's eyes flashed. "Miss Selwyn, your sentimental education of my son continues at remarkable speed." Margot felt every gaze return to her. The old safe habit pressed at her tongue. Apologize, differ, escape. But breakfast had already become a trial, and Felix was watching the witnesses. "No, Your Grace," she said. "I am only answering the question he was afraid to ask aloud." The Duke's face altered by that nearly invisible measure she had begun to recognize. Approval would have been too warm a word. Recognition returned, steadier than before. He looked at Hales. "Have the box brought to the morning room." Lady Cressida sat straighter. "Alexander, surely you do not intend to open it like evidence before guests?" "Not before guests." His voice was calm. "Before witnesses." Miss Vane's eyes widened. Lady Fenton set down her fork. Lady Marchmont looked as though she wished her morning room, her place cards, and perhaps all of Hampshire could disappear. "This is absurd," Lady Cressida said. "Felix was an infant. Children form attachments to nonsense. We remove it. They forget." Felix whispered, "I didn't forget." The words were so small they nearly fell under the table. Margot heard them. So did the Duke. His attention moved to his son with a force that softened only when it reached him. "No one is asking you to forget," he said. Lady Cressida gave a brittle laugh. "How touching. Shall we ask the box whether it has feelings as well?" The Duke rose. The gentleman rose with him by instinct. The servants froze. Sunlight lay across the silver urns as if nothing terrible had entered the room. "Lady Marchmont," he said, "I apologize for the inconvenience to your household." The The matter will be handled in the morning room, with open doors after breakfast." "Of course," Lady Marchmont said faintly. "Of course." Lady Cressida looked at her husband with a smile so polished it seemed carved. "And Miss Selwyn is to attend this inspection of family relics." Margot prepared to say no. It was not her family. It was not her place. Yet Felix's hand shifted under the table and stopped just short of her sleeve, as if he had remembered that even reaching could cost someone. The Duke saw the aborted movement. His expression hardened, not against Felix, but against the lesson that had taught him restraint. "Miss Selwyn," he said, "will be assisting Lady Marchmont with correspondence in the same room. Her presence requires no further explanation." "How convenient," Lady Cressida murmured. "Very," the Duke replied. No one mistook the word for agreement. Breakfast ended with almost nothing eaten, chairs moved, cups cooled. The letter to Margot's aunt remained beside Lady Cressida's plate, unsent for the moment, though its threat had not vanished. As the guests began to rise, Felix gathered valor against his chest. The toy's loose leg clicked once against his sleeve. He looked up at Margot. "Will you come?" The question was improper, too direct, too full of need. Margot felt Lady Cressida waiting for her answer, ready to turn it into proof of whatever charge she had not yet spoken aloud. So Margot chose each word with care. "I will go where Lady Marchmont has asked me to work," she said. "If the box is brought there, then I will be in the room." Felix absorbed this. It was not the promise he wanted. It was the safest promise she could give. The Duke looked at her, as if he understood the cost of such carefulness. Then Hales reappeared at the door with 2 footmen behind him. Between them they carried a dark cedar box, about 3 feet long, with blackened corners, and a scratched brass plate that caught the morning light. Felix stopped breathing. Lady Cressida's face went utterly still. On the brass plate, beneath the scars of deliberate scraping, Margot could just make out the words, "Master Felix Arundell, Nursery, Ravenmere Abbey." The Duke saw the scratches. He saw his son's fear. Then he looked at his wife. "After breakfast," he said, "we open it." The morning room at Marchmont House had never looked less suited to truth. It was a cheerful room by design, with tall windows open to a pale garden, a Turkey carpet in faded crimson, and a long writing table already burdened with Lady Marchmont's place cards, invitation, lists, inkstands, and 3 bowls of violets arranged to suggest domestic calm. Yet when the dark cedar box was carried in by 2 footmen and set on the carpet before the hearth, the flowers seemed absurd. Felix stood just inside the doorway, with Valor tucked under his arm, the toy still wrapped in Margot's handkerchief. Margot sat where Lady Marchmont had placed her, halfway down the writing table, near enough to the box to see the scratches on the brass plate, and far enough away to avoid any appearance of claiming the scene. Lady Marchmont occupied the chair nearest the tea table, though she had no tea before her. The Duke stood beside the mantel, severe and silent. Lady Cressida chose the chair nearest the door. It looked accidental until Margot realized the position allowed her to leave first, speak first to any servant, and intercept anything carried in. The Duke realized it too. "Cressida," he said, "take the chair beside Lady Marchmont." The Duchess lifted her brows. "I am comfortable here. I was not inquiring after your comfort." The room chilled. A footman's gaze dropped to the carpet. Lady Marchmont looked as if she wished to become one of the violets. Lady Cressida rose, after one elegant pause, and crossed to the indicated chair with a smile that made obedience look like contempt. Margot kept her eyes on the unfinished place card before her, but her hand had stopped above the name Lord Fenton. She had never been close to ducal anger held so tightly in check. It did not roar. It arranged the room until even silence stood where it was told. Mr. Hales stepped forward with a small ring of keys on a silver tray. "Your Grace, the lock is stiff." "I did not force it." "Good," the Duke said. He took the keys himself. Felix made a small sound. Margot looked at him, then at the box. The brass plate read Master Felix Arundell, Nursery, Ravenmere Abbey. The words had been scratched by some sharp object, not enough to erase them, only enough to show that erasure had been attempted and failed. The Duke chose the smallest key. It resisted once, then turned with a dull click. Felix stepped back. Margot wanted to reach for him, but she did not. The room had already turned his need into evidence once. She would not help it do so again. "You need not look if you do not wish to," the Duke said to him. Felix swallowed. "I want to know if they remembered me." Lady Cressida gave a soft laugh. "Darling, objects do not remember." "No," Margot said before she could stop herself. Every face turned. She kept her voice gentle. "But sometimes they help people remember without being alone." The Duchess's smile thinned. The Duke lifted the lid. The scent of cedar, folded linen, and long-closed rooms rose into the morning air. Inside lay the orderly remains of a life that had been packed away too carefully to be forgotten by accident. A christening cap wrapped in tissue, a blue-stitched baby blanket, 3 wooden animals besides Valor, a small book of nursery rhymes, a packet of drawings tied with faded green ribbon. Felix stared. "My lion." The Duke removed the wooden lion and held it out. Felix came forward as if approaching something sacred. He took it in both hands. One painted eye had chipped away, but the mane still shone faintly gold. "Nurse Pruitt," said he, guarded the window. Lady Cressida sighed. "A servant's fancies. Alexander, you see how unhealthy this is. He clings to old nonsense because it was indulged. He clings to what was taken without explanation," the Duke said. He lifted the packet of drawings and untied the ribbon. The first drawing showed a horse, a lion, and a tall woman with round spectacles. Beneath it, in careful childish letters, was written Nurse Pruitt and me. The second showed a man beside a much smaller boy. "Papa home soon." The third made Felix' breath catch. It showed a lady in blue beside a cradle. The lady's dress had been colored carefully, but the face had been rubbed away until the paper thinned, not unfinished, removed. Lady Marchmont pressed a hand to her throat. Lady Cressida rose. "Enough. I will not have my son's nursery scribbles examined by strangers. Sit down," the Duke said. His voice was lower this time. Felix flinched at the sound. The Duke saw it, and the anger left his face so quickly that pain showed beneath. He lowered the drawing. "Forgive me, Felix, I am not angry with you." Felix clutched the lion and Valor together. She said faces can be spoiled if boys are wicked. No one moved. Even the servants seemed to stop breathing. Lady Cressida's cheeks colored beneath their careful powder. "He invents things when he wants sympathy." Margot heard her own voice before caution could intervene. "Children invent dragons, Your Grace. They rarely invent sentences so precise." The Duchess turned to her. "You forget yourself." Margot's fingers tightened around the edge of the writing table. "No. I remember exactly who I am, a poor woman, a guest by mercy, a person without rank, fortune, or any shield, except the truth she had seen in a child's eyes." The Duke's gaze touched her face for one brief second. It did not command her to stop. It steadied her by refusing to look away. Hales cleared his throat. "Your Grace, there appears to be something beneath the lining." The Duke looked down. One corner of blue fabric inside the box had lifted where age had loosened the glue. He slipped 2 fingers beneath it, moved carefully, and drew out a folded letter pressed flat from long concealment. Its seal had cracked, but the writing across the front remained clear. "For His Grace, should I be sent away before I can speak?" Felix whispered. "Nurse Pruitt." Lady Cressida crossed the room in 2 swift steps. "That is private household slander." The Duke held the letter beyond her reach. "It is addressed to me, by a dismissed servant who resented correction. Then it will be easily disproved. Alexander, don't make a fool of yourself before a dependent woman." The room recoiled from the intimacy and ugliness of it. The Duke looked at his wife, and Margot saw something cold and final enter his eyes. "Do not speak again until I ask you a question." Lady Cressida went white. The Duke broke the seal. Margot lowered her eyes because the letter was not hers to read, but when he spoke, his voice gave the truth to the room. "Your Grace, I beg pardon for writing what I was forbidden to say aloud. Master Felix has grown fearful since Her Grace ordered that he cease using the word mamma, saying it made him weak and vulgar." When he cried after dreams, he was told he must earn tenderness by being quiet. I was dismissed this morning for objecting to the punishment of affection. I leave his wooden horse because he says valor remembers kindness when he cannot. I fear the boy will learn silence if no one tells him, love is not a prize. The Duke stopped reading. The last words remained in the air. Love is not a prize. Margot felt them pass through the room, through Felix, through the Duke, through every polished witness who had ever confused coldness with breeding. Felix's face had gone blank in the terrible way children protected themselves when adult pain grew too bright. Margot rose at once. Not toward the letter, not toward the Duchess, toward him. She stopped an arm's length away and lowered her voice. Lord Felix, Valor and the lion may sit with you by the window if you like. They have had a long journey from the box. He looked first at his father. The Duke nodded once. Felix went with her, not touching her, but close enough to trust the space between them. That restraint pierced Margot more than his tears would have done. She settled the child near the window and placed the lion beside the horse. Valor's loose leg shifted under the handkerchief, and the faint click sounded again, small as a secret knocking from inside wood. The Duke heard it. Margot knew because his gaze moved to the toy for one heartbeat before returning to the letter. Lady Cressida stood with one hand pressed to the back of a chair. Her beauty remained intact. Her power did not completely, not yet. A servant's melodrama, she said. You will ruin your son with softness. The Duke folded Nurse Pruitt's letter with exact care. No, he said. I have already risked ruining him with absence. The confession changed the room more than accusation could have done. It gave no one an easy villain to applaud against. It placed guilt where power usually refused to look. Margot felt her understanding of him shift, reluctantly and dangerously, toward respect. He turned to Hales. Find Mrs. Pruitt. Yes, Your Grace. Discreetly. Today. Begin with the steward at Ravenmere and the last housekeeper's accounts. Lady Cressida's lips parted. You would bring that woman back over my objection. I would bring back the woman my son remembers without fear. Felix lifted his head. Hope appeared so suddenly on his face that Margot had to look away. Hope in a child was unbearable when it had been starved. The Duke crossed to the window and lowered himself until he was not towering over his son. The movement seemed unfamiliar to him, and therefore sincere. Felix, he said, you may call your mother whatever word your heart can honestly give her. No one will punish you for truth again. Felix's eyes filled, but he did not cry. He only leaned against Margot's skirt for half a second, too tired to remember caution. The Duke saw that small surrender. Lady Cressida saw it too. Her face became calm again, which frightened Margot more than the anger had. Calm meant she had found a new weapon. The Duchess turned toward the table where the letter lay in the Duke's hand. How extraordinary, Miss Selwyn, she said, mild enough for every witness to repeat, that every secret in my son's life seems to improve your position. Margot did not answer. The Duke did. What is extraordinary, he said, is that Miss Selwyn has done in one day what this household failed to do in 6 months. Lady Cressida's eyes narrowed. And what is that? He looked at Felix, then at Margot, then back to his wife. She made him feel safe enough to tell the truth. By noon, Marchmont House had learned to speak of a hidden nursery letter without using the word cruelty. It called the matter unfortunate. It called Nurse Pruitt overattached. It called Felix sensitive, Lady Cressida delicate, and the Duke understandably concerned. Only Margot, seated alone at the morning room table with a stack of place cards before her, allowed herself the plainer word, wrong. What had been done was wrong, and the whole bright house seemed determined to cover that wrong with violets, silver bells, and whispers in well-bred voices. Lady Marchmont had retreated to her sitting room with a headache. The Duke had gone with Hales to send inquiries toward Ravenmere Abbey. Felix had been taken upstairs to rest, clutching Valor and the returned wooden lion as if 2 toys could defend a country house from adult invention. Margot remained where Lady Marchmont had asked her to work, pen in hand, spine straight, name after name drying neatly in black ink. Lord Fenton. Lady Fenton, Miss Aurelia Vane, the Dowager Countess of Marchmont. She wrote them all with care because careful work was one of the few things society still allowed her to possess. Then she reached for the next blank card and found beneath it a folded scandal sheet. It had not been there 10 minutes earlier. Margot did not touch it at once. She looked toward the open door, then toward the windows, then toward the bell pull. No one stood nearby. The room smelled of ink, paper, and damp roses. She lifted the scandal sheet by one clean corner and opened it. A paragraph near the middle had been marked in pencil with 2 hard strokes. Dependent gentlewomen, when admitted too generously into it. Noble households have been known to confuse compassion with advancement, and a lonely heir may become a ladder if his guardians are slow to observe the hand upon the rung. Margot read it once, then again. The words did not name her. They did not need to. That was the artistry of public ruin. It pointed without touching. It accused without proof. It allowed every reader the pleasure of discovery. She set it flat beside the place cards and looked at the pencil marks. Heavy pressure, angled downward. The same kind of emphasis a person made when angry or when pretending certainty for someone else to find. Margot took a fresh sheet of paper and began to write, not a defense, not yet, but a sequence. After breakfast, the box opened in the morning room. Lady Cressida sat beside Lady Marchmont. Nurse Pruitt's letter found beneath lining. Hales sent to inquire, Felix taken upstairs. Lady Marchmont left with headache. Margot remained at table. At 12 minutes past noon, scandal sheet found beneath place cards. She stopped, listened, and added another line. Door remained open. Any person passing could have entered. She had learned long ago that women without power needed memory as other women needed lawyers. A sound came from the doorway. Lady Cressida stood there in pale muslin, gloved hands folded over a reticule of blue silk. She did not look at the scandal sheet first. She looked at Margot's notes. How industrious. Margot placed her pen down. I was asked to assist with correspondence, so I see. You have taken to the role with impressive seriousness. The Duchess entered as if the room belonged to her. In a way, rooms often did. Rank made possession out of air. How curious. Is that one of Lord Fenton's little papers? Margot looked at the sheet. It was under the place cards, was it? It was not there when I began. Lady Cressida's smile remained calm. You must be careful, Miss Selwyn. Printed gossip has a way of attaching itself to those who pick it up too eagerly. Then I am fortunate I picked it up by the corner. You think yourself clever. No, Your Grace. I think myself watched. For the first time, the Duchess's eyes sharpened with something like pleasure. At last, you understand your position. Margot folded her hands to keep them still. I have always understood my position. Others are merely disappointed that I do not confuse it with guilt. Lady Cressida moved closer to the table. Her gaze drifted over the names Margot had written, over the scandal sheet, over the quiet evidence of a poor woman trying to protect the facts before society rearranged them. Do you know what happens when a woman of no fortune becomes interesting? Margot did not answer. She is discussed until discussion becomes her character. A sentence in a scandal sheet may be denied. A whisper cannot. By tomorrow, every guest in this house will wonder whether you encouraged Felix because his affection improves your prospects. By Friday, improves your prospects. By Friday, your aunt in Bath will receive inquiries disguised as concern. By next week, a door you expected to open will remain closed. The old fear touched Margot's back like cold fingers. She saw her aunt's narrow drawing room, the careful accounts, the small dependency they both survived by never inconveniencing those with greater names. Lady Cressida knew exactly where to press. That knowledge steadied Margot more than it frightened her. You wrote to my aunt before breakfast, she said. Now this appears before luncheon. Your Grace moves quickly. A duchess must manage disorder. A mother might first ask why her son was afraid. The Duchess's face did not change, but her body did. One breath held too long. One gloved finger pressing against the reticule clasp. You have known my son for less than a day. long enough to know he should not believe love has to be earned by silence. Lady Cressida leaned close enough that her perfume nearly smothered the ink. Do not mistake his loneliness for a claim upon him. Margot looked up. No, you only receive his trust, my husband's attention, Lady Marchmont's pity, a room, a chair, a reason to remain. Each word was soft enough to be plausible if repeated. That was how she fought, not with force, with phrases polished until they could pass as concern. Margot touched the scandal sheet. And you give me this. I gave you nothing. Then you will not object if I ask who did. A flash of anger crossed the Duchess's face and vanished. Ask anyone you like. By the time you have an answer, the question will have already served its purpose. She turned to leave. At the threshold, she paused. Some women are safest when they are forgettable, Miss Selwyn. You should have remained so. When she was gone, Margot sat very still. Her heart beat hard, but not wildly. Something in her had passed through fear and found discipline on the other side. She drew another sheet toward her and began a letter to her aunt. My dear aunt, if any report should reach Bath for my own account, know first that I have not been dismissed from Marchmont House, nor have I behaved in any manner that requires retreat. I am remaining for the present by my own decision, under Lady Marchmont's stated need for assistance, and with open doors in all matters concerning Lord Felix Arundell. She stopped there. Too much explanation could sound guilty. Too little could leave her aunt defenseless. She added only one more line. I have learned that silence protects reputation poorly when others are willing to spend it for you. The door moved again. This time it was the Duke. He entered without ceremony but stopped just inside, as if the open threshold mattered. Margot rose. Your Grace. His gaze went first to the scandal sheet, then to the notes beside it, then to her face. Who brought that? That is the question Her Grace suggested I asked too late. He crossed to the table. May I? Margot nodded. He read the marked paragraph. His expression did not darken at once. It settled, which was worse. This was placed where you would be blamed for having it, or where someone else might find it and enjoy blaming me. You have made a timeline. I have had practice, remembering what powerful people later prefer to forget. He looked at her then, and the restrained intensity in his face made the room seem smaller. Miss Selwyn, I told you last night I would not let your name be spent to repair my failures. Names are spent by others all the time, Your Grace. Not while I have breath to object. It was too much, too direct, too dangerous because it was not flattery. It sounded like a vow formed before he had permission to make one. Margot lowered her eyes to the place cards. A vow from a duke is still not shelter unless it is used carefully. Then tell me how to use it. The question surprised her. Men like him usually decided the shape of rescue before asking whether it crushed the rescued. Margot touched the letter she had written. My aunt must hear from me before anyone else writes around me. Not a dramatic explanation, a simple account. If you frank it, Your Grace, it will say, I am not without protection. If you write it yourself, it will say I need a man to certify my innocence. His mouth tightened, but not with offense. You are right. And if I remain near Lord Felix, it must be because the room requires me, not because I seek him. You are already accused, though you have avoided him more carefully than many would have managed. Accusation is not permission to become careless. The Duke placed the scandal sheet on the table as if it were contaminated. Hales has sent a man toward Ravenmere. Nurse Pruitt may be in Winchester. We may know before dusk. Hope moved through Margot and frightened her with its speed. Felix should not be told until she is found. Agreed. A pause followed, quiet but full. The Duke looked toward the chair where Felix had sat that morning. When he leaned against you today, you did not touch him. Everyone was watching. I know. He deserved comfort. I know that too. His voice roughened on the last word. Margot glanced at him and saw the wound he refused to display. Not jealousy, not irritation. Shame. The kind a father felt when a stranger had given restraint more wisely than he had given presence. She softened before she could prevent it. Your Grace, children do not require perfection, they require return. He held her gaze. And do women? The question was too quiet. It opened a door neither of them could walk through. Margot folded her letter with careful hands. Women require choice. He bowed his head once. Then choose whether I carry this to the post myself. Please do. He took the letter without touching her fingers. That care nearly undid her. At the sound of footsteps, both turned. Miss Aurelia Vane stood in the doorway, with another copy of the scandal sheet pinched between two fingers, her eyes bright with discovery. Behind her hovered Lady Fenton and a young maid who looked close to tears. Miss Vane held up the paper as if displaying evidence at trial. How awkward, she said. This was found near the blue parlour, marked in the very same place. Miss Selwyn, did you mislay yours, or are there several copies of your little concern? Margot saw the trap widen. The Duke did too, but this time Margot did not lower her eyes. She looked first at the maid, then at the pencil marks, then at Miss Vane's eager face, and understood that the next battle would not be fought in whispers. It had already been carried to the doorway. Miss Aurelia Vane held the scandal sheet as though it were a visiting card from ruin, and for one clean second Margot saw the pleasure beneath her alarm. Lady Fenton stood behind her, uneasy but curious. The young maid beside them kept her eyes fixed on the carpet, one hand twisting the edge of her apron. The Duke remained near the table, with Margot's folded letter to Bath in one hand, and the first marked scandal sheet lying between them. He did not speak. That silence might have been abandonment if Margot had not understood it for what it was. He was leaving room for her to stand before he brought rank to bear. The knowledge steadied her. Miss Vane, Margot said. Where exactly was that found? Miss Vane blinked, disappointed by the practical question. Near the blue parlour. Near the blue parlour is not a place. Was it on a chair, on the carpet, beside the writing desk, or in someone's hand? Lady Fenton gave the smallest cough. Miss Vane's smile thinned. On the little table beside the door. Folded or open? I beg your pardon. Folded or open? Margot touched the first paper with 2 fingers. The one placed beneath Lady Marchmont's place cards was folded inward, with the marked paragraph hidden until opened. Yours is open, marked side outward. That suggests it was placed to be seen. The maid looked up before she could stop herself. Margot noticed, so did the Duke. Miss Vane laughed lightly. How very forensic, Miss Selwyn. One might think you had expected such a discovery. No, Margot said. I have learned that a woman without protection must become exact when others become imaginative. The Duke's gaze moved to her face, but he remained silent. Lady Fenton looked from one paper to the other, her interest losing its appetite. The markings do appear similar, she admitted. Indeed, Margot said. But the pressure on this one is heavier at the end, as though the pencil slipped while the paper was already open. May I ask who first saw it? The maid's fingers twisted harder. Miss Vane answered too quickly. This girl did. Then let her speak. Miss Vane flushed. Really, Miss Selwyn, you are not mistress here. No, Margot replied. That is why I am asking questions instead of giving orders. The Duke finally moved, only one step. Enough for everyone to remember he could change the shape of the room whenever he wished. Answer Miss Selwyn, he said to the maid. The girl curtsied so low her cap trembled. I found it on the table, Your Grace. Miss Vane was coming down the corridor, and I said as there was a paper left there. Had you seen it before? Margot asked gently. Yes, miss. Miss Vane turned sharply. You did not say that. The maid's face went pale. I was not asked, miss. Margot kept her voice soft. Fear made truth fragile. Where had you seen it? In her Grace's hand. Lady Fenton drew in a breath. Miss Vane looked as if the air had turned against her. The Duke's expression did not change, but the room seemed to narrow around the maid. When? He asked. After luncheon, Your Grace. Her Grace crossed from the morning room to the blue parlour. She had papers in her hand. I only noticed because one fell, and she told me not to touch it. Did she say what it was? No, Your Grace. Miss Vane recovered enough to lift her chin. A duchess may carry a printed sheet without conspiracy. Of course, Margot said, and a poor relation may touch one without guilt. That is precisely the point. Lady Fenton looked down. The sentence had reached her where accusation would not have done. Miss Vane's face hardened. You speak very boldly for someone whose circumstances are so uncertain. My circumstances are uncertain, Margot said. My conduct is not. The words left her before fear could soften them. For a moment, the old habit of vanishing tugged at her. She resisted it. The Duke placed Margot's letter to her aunt on the table, then looked at Miss Vane. You will return that paper to me? Miss Vane hesitated. He held out his hand. She gave it to him. You will also refrain from carrying scandal from room to room, under the pretense of moral concern. Her mouth parted. Your Grace, I meant only to prevent embarrassment. You have created it. Lady Fenton gave a nervous murmur. I am sure Miss Vane did not intend harm. Intentions are often claimed after consequences become visible, the Duke said. Miss Vane lowered her eyes, but anger remained bright beneath her lashes. At the threshold, Lady Cressida appeared so quietly that none of them had heard her approach. She wore an expression of mild inquiry and a fresh pair of gloves. Margot noticed that the blue reticule she had carried earlier was gone. What a solemn gathering, the Duchess said. Has Miss Selwyn discovered another secret that improves her position? The Duke turned with controlled slowness. Your name has been given in connection with these papers. By whom? A maid. Lady Cressida looked at the girl, and the maid nearly stepped backward. How alarming that servants have taken to interpreting what their betters carry between rooms. Margot saw the trap shift. If the maid were frightened into apology, the proof would crumble into confusion. No one interpreted, Margot said. She observed. Lady Cressida smiled. You are eager to defend servants when they serve your story. I am eager to defend anyone whose truth is at risk of being stepped on. How noble. How convenient. The Duchess moved toward the table, but the Duke's voice stopped her. Do not touch the papers. Lady Cressida went still. A silence followed, more dangerous because Lady Fenton and Miss Vane were there to witness it. Margot understood then that this was no longer only about Felix. Cressida's power depended on making each person feel alone. A servant alone could be dismissed. Margot alone could be discredited. Felix alone could be corrected. But in a room where observations met one another, her methods began to show their seams. I have written to my aunt, Margot said, deliberately changing the angle of the attack. His Grace has offered to see the letter posted. Lady Cressida's gaze sharpened. How protective. The word leaned toward impropriety. The Duke's face cooled. Margot answered before he could. How proper. A letter carried openly is less interesting than one sent around a woman's back. Lady Fenton looked at her then with reluctant respect. Miss Vane did not. Lady Cressida gave a little laugh. Careful, Miss Selwyn. Suspicion can call decency by many names. Then let suspicion speak plainly, Margot said. Her heart struck hard once against her ribs, but her voice held. If your Grace believes I have behaved improperly with Lord Felix or with his Grace, accuse me before those present. If not, then do not use half-phrases to do what courage will not. The room froze. It was the first time Margot had placed the Duchess's insinuations under light and asked them to keep their shape. Lady Cressida's smile vanished. For one breath, the beautiful mask failed. Behind it stood fury. Then Lady Marchmont's voice sounded from the hall, thin with distress. What is happening here, she entered, a hand pressed to her brow, and took in the papers, the maid, Miss Vane's colour, Lady Fenton's unease, the Duke's stillness, and Margot standing where she had no rank but her own spine. Lady Marchmont, Margot said, I regret the disturbance in your morning room. Lady Marchmont looked at the two scandal sheets and seemed suddenly older. I invited you to help with place cards, not to be hunted among them. The simple sentence did more than comfort. It placed the hostess, however timidly, beside truth. Lady Cressida saw it and turned away. This grows tiresome. I'm going upstairs to see my son. You will wait, the Duke said. Felix is resting. He is my child, and I am his father. Their eyes met. Whatever passed between them had years inside it. Lady Cressida curtsied, perfect and cold. Then perhaps you should try being present for more than a morning before giving instructions. The sentence struck the Duke. Margot saw it land. He did not answer, which made the wound visible. Lady Cressida left before anyone could stop her. A few minutes later, the room began to move again, but not freely. Lady Fenton withdrew with Miss Vane, no doubt to turn restraint into a report that sounded charitable. The maid was sent to the housekeeper, only after the Duke assured her she had done nothing wrong. Lady Marchmont sat heavily and looked at Margot. "My dear, I am sorry." Margot almost said it was nothing. The lie would have been graceful and useless. "Thank you," she said instead. Hales appeared at the door before any softer moment could deepen. He carried a folded note. "Your Grace." This was brought to the nursery maid by a page. It claimed to be from Her Grace. The Duke took it. Margot saw the change in him before he spoke. "Where is the nursery maid?" "Below stairs, Your Grace." She left her post briefly, believing Lord Felix was to be moved to the small sitting room. Margot stood. "Felix is alone? Mrs. Hodges with him now," Hales said quickly. But there was disturbance before she arrived. The Duke was already moving. Margot followed because no one told her not to, and because fear had become a map she knew too well. They reached the nursery corridor to find Felix standing in the open doorway, white-faced, valor clutched against his chest, and Margot's handkerchief, trailing from the toy like a little torn flag. On the carpet at his feet lay the drawing he had made the day before, ripped cleanly through the middle. The wooden lion from the box had been broken from its base and placed beside it, not destroyed beyond repair, only wounded enough for a child to understand the message. Felix looked at Margot first, then at his father. "I didn't do it," he whispered. The Duke lowered himself before him at once. "I know." Felix's eyes filled, but he fought the tears with such discipline that Margot wanted to weep for him. She knelt at the edge of the ruined drawing, careful not to touch it yet. A small thread of pale blue silk was caught on the lion's splintered base. She lifted it between two fingers. No one spoke. From somewhere far below, a clock struck the hour. Valor's loose leg clicked once under Felix's hand, as if the secret inside the horse had heard the house lie and was waiting for its turn to speak. The pale blue thread lay across Margot's gloved fingers like a piece of the house's conscience, small enough to deny and bright enough to accuse. Felix stared at it, then at the broken wooden lion, then at the torn drawing, split through the middle of the boy and the woman under the window. He did not cry. That was what made Margot's chest ache most. He had learned not to waste tears until he knew whether they would cost someone. The Duke remained kneeling before him in the nursery doorway, his black coat brushing the carpet, his face level with his son's. "I know you did not do it," he said again, more softly. Felix's fingers tightened around Valor until the loose wooden leg clicked beneath the handkerchief. "Will the lion be sent away because it broke?" "No." The Duke's answer came too quickly to be performance. Broken things are not dismissed. Felix looked at him with doubt too old for 5 years. Margot lowered herself beside the torn drawing, careful to leave space. "Sometimes they are mended where everyone can see the join," she said. "So nobody has to pretend they were never hurt." Felix's eyes moved to her. People too. The question was so quiet that the nursery seemed to bend toward it. Margot held the blue thread in her palm and chose the truth over comfort. People most of all. But mending people takes longer, and no one should pull at the place before it is ready. The Duke looked at her then, and the grief in his expression had no rank left in it. Only fatherhood, late and frightened. Hales stood behind them with the false note in his hand, the paper that had called the nursery maid away under Her Grace's name. His voice was low. "Your Grace, the girl swears she believed the message came from the Duchess. She says the page was not one of Lady Marchmont's regular boys. Find him," the Duke said. "And until he is found, no person enters this nursery without my direct permission. Not a guest, not a servant without assignment. Not the Duchess," Felix inhaled sharply. "Even Mama?" The Duke's jaw tightened. Margot saw the pain of that answer before he gave it. "Even the Duchess?" Felix lowered his head, not in victory but in confusion. The world had shifted beneath him again. The Duke held out his hand, not touching. "May I sit with you?" Felix looked at the hand, then at Margot, then at the lion. "If valor comes, valor may command the entire campaign." A tiny, startled breath escaped Felix. It was nearly amusement. The Duke sat on the nursery floor as if he had never done such a thing in his life, and would have shattered any custom in England to do it now. Felix sank beside him, still clutching valor, and leaned against his father's arm by no more than an inch. The Duke did not seize the closeness. He let it remain Felix's choice. Margot gathered the broken lion's base and body, then examined the splinter. "This can be repaired with paste and a small pin. It will not be invisible, but it will stand." "Nurse Pruitt said lions don't mind scars," Felix whispered. Then Nurse Pruitt was very sensible. The Duke looked toward Hales. "Where is she?" "The man sent to Winchester returned with word, Your Grace. Mrs. Pruitt was found at a widow's lodging near the cathedral close. She agreed to come, but only if she might speak in a room where Miss Selwyn is present as witness." Lady Marchmont, who had arrived breathless and pale at the far end of the corridor, gave a faint sound. "Miss Selwyn?" Hales bowed. "Those were her words, my lady." The Duke did not ask why. He looked at Margot. "Will you stand as witness?" Every safe answer advised refusal. Margot could hear Lady Cressida's future accusation forming around the very request. Yet Felix was staring at her as if the answer would decide whether adults with truth were also adults with courage. "Yes," she said. "With open doors and Lady Marchmont present." The Duke inclined his head. "Of course." That courtesy, given before she had to demand it, settled something inside her she did not dare name. Hales withdrew. Margot wrapped the blue silk thread inside a blank place card from her pocket and wrote the time upon it. The Duke saw the motion. "You keep evidence like a clerk." "No, Your Grace." "Like a woman people expect to misremember." His eyes held hers for one breath too long. "Then let us make certain you are not alone in remembering." Dusk gathered in the morning room, with the lamps lit early and both doors left open. Lady Marchmont sat near the tea tray, spine stiff with the courage of a woman discovering it after decades of politeness. Margot sat at the writing table, the broken lion and its base before her, a pot of paste and a narrow brass pin beside it. Felix had been permitted to wait in the adjoining room with Hales, near enough to know he had not been banished, far enough that adult truth would not strike him full in the face. The Duke stood by the mantel. He looked as if each minute had carved him sharper. When Nurse Pruitt entered, she did not look like a woman who had come to triumph. She was small, grey-haired, and neatly dressed in a dark gown brushed thin at the cuffs. Her spectacles trembled in one hand. In the other she carried a folded ribbon, faded green, and a packet tied with string. She curtsied deeply to the Duke, then to Lady Marchmont, then, unexpectedly, to Margot. "Miss..." Margot rose. "Mrs. Pruitt." The nurse's eyes filled at the sound of her own name spoken without suspicion. She recovered quickly. "I was told Lord Felix is safe." "He is near," the Duke said. His voice was controlled, but not cold. "He has asked for you." Nurse Pruitt pressed the green ribbon against her palm. "Then I shall speak plainly, Your Grace, because the boy has waited long enough for plain speech." She placed the packet on the table. "These are copies of 2 letters I wrote after my dismissal. This one was returned to me unopened through the Ravenmere housekeeper. This one I sent by a groom I trusted. He later lost his place and would not tell me why." The Duke took the letters, but his attention remained on her. "Why did you not come to me in London?" "I tried, Your Grace." "At Bellhaven House, I was told, the Duke received no dismissed servants. At Ravenmere, I was told Her Grace had ordered my name not spoken in the nursery." Lady Marchmont closed her eyes briefly. Margot felt the paste knife still in her hand. Nurse Pruitt unfolded the green ribbon. "This tied Master Felix's drawings. I kept it because he asked me to keep something that remembered he had not been wicked. That was his word. Wicked." The Duke's face tightened. "Tell me what happened." Nurse Pruitt looked toward the adjoining room before answering. "During the fever, he called me Mama once, half asleep. I told him he was loved and should rest. Her Grace heard of it from a maid. The next day she said, if he used that word wrongly again, the person who received it would be removed. She said affection was not to be begged from servants. When he cried, she said he must earn tenderness by being quiet. I objected. By nightfall I was dismissed. And valor? Margot asked, because Felix would ask later if she did not. Nurse Pruitt's expression softened. He feared the horse would be taken. I told him brave things have places where secrets sleep, and he must not pull at valor's loose leg unless the horse asked. It was foolish comfort, perhaps. Margot looked at the mended base of the lion and felt the small click of valor's leg return to her memory. Not foolish. The Duke unfolded one of the copies. You wrote that my son was being taught loss as obedience. Yes, Your Grace. Her Grace did not always speak in anger. That made it harder. She spoke as if she were improving him. She removed whatever he reached for, then praised him when he stopped reaching. The room held the words. They were worse than shouting, because they described a pattern quiet enough to pass as discipline. The Duke turned away for a moment, one hand braced on the mantel. When he faced them again, his voice had changed. Mrs. Pruitt, if you are willing, you will return to my son under my direct authority. Your wage will be restored and increased. Your position will not depend upon Her Grace's displeasure. Nurse Pruitt bowed her head. I will return, Your Grace, if Master Felix wishes it, and if Miss Selwyn is not punished for having believed him. Margot went still. The Duke looked at her, and in that look was both gratitude and danger. Miss Selwyn remains in this house because she chooses to remain, he said. Margot lifted her chin. And because Lord Felix must not learn that truth sends people away. A small sound came from the adjoining room. Felix stood just inside the doorway, Hales behind him. He had been listening long enough to understand the shape, if not every word. Nurse Pruitt turned. For a moment, neither moved. Then Felix walked to her with valor clutched to his chest and stopped 1 foot away, as if the old rule still barred him. I didn't mean to make you go, he said. Nurse Pruitt knelt, her face breaking with tenderness she did not try to hide. Oh, my dear boy. You never did. Felix leaned forward then, and she wrapped her arms around him with a care that asked nothing from him but presence. The Duke closed his eyes. Margot looked down at the lion, fitting the brass pin into its base so the little creature could stand again. When she lifted it, Felix saw and gave a trembling smile. He stands. Yes, Margot said, not as before, but truly. Footsteps sounded in the corridor. Lady Cressida appeared at the open door, dressed for dinner, her face calm enough to chill the room. Her gaze moved from Felix in Nurse Pruitt's arms to the Duke, then to Margot, holding the mended lion. How touching, she said. The household has replaced me entirely. Lady Cressida stood at the open door, as if she had discovered a theft, rather than a child in the arms of the nurse who had once comforted him. The words she had spoken, calm and edged with injury, remained in the room. The household has replaced me entirely. Felix pulled back from Nurse Pruitt at once. Not far. Only enough to prove he had heard the accusation and begun to wonder whether love could be divided into crimes. Margot saw the old lesson return to his face. Wanting one person meant betraying another. Receiving comfort meant someone would pay for it. She set the mended lion on the table and stepped aside so no one could say she had placed herself between mother and son. No one has replaced your grace, she said. Lord Felix is not a chair to be occupied. Lady Cressida's eyes moved to her. How eloquent you become when my child's arms are around someone else. Nurse Pruitt rose, color draining from her face, but Felix caught her sleeve before she could retreat. That small gesture did more damage to Lady Cressida's composure than any accusation might have done. The Duke crossed the room, not hurried, not theatrical, and stopped where Felix could see him. Felix, he said, you are not responsible for any adult's pride. Lady Cressida laughed softly. Pride? Is that what you call a mother's pain? No, he answered. I call it pain when it does not punish a child for failing to cure it. The Duchess's face hardened. You have been a father for one day, and already judge me with the assistance of a dismissed nurse and a dependent spinster. Margot felt the insult strike and pass through her without finding the old hollow place. It had been filled not with confidence, but with purpose. "Accuse me if you must," she said, "but do not make Lord Felix carry the accusation for you." Felix looked at her, then at his father. The Duke inclined his head toward Hales. "Take Lord Felix and Mrs. Pruitt to the nursery sitting room. The door remains open. You remain in the corridor." "Yes, Your Grace." Felix hesitated. "Will Miss Selwyn go away?" Lady Cressida's mouth curved. The Duke heard the trap in the question and answered with care. "Miss Selwyn is here because she chooses to be here," Margot added, "and because Lady Marchmont still has place cards enough to bury a village." Felix gave a weak, surprised smile. It was small, but it belonged to him. Nurse Pruitt guided him out with Hales behind them. When the child was gone, Lady Cressida's softness vanished. "You think this will remain private?" she asked. A nursery maid, a recovered servant, a poor relation, and a husband suddenly theatrical with remorse. By tonight, the house will have chosen its version. The Duke's voice remained even. "Then choose yours with caution. No, Alexander. Let society judge what it sees." Her gaze went to Margot. "And it has seen enough." By the time Lady Marchmont's assembly began that evening, the whole house was dressed in brightness and listening for disaster. The chandeliers in the ballroom burned with hundreds of candles, fiddles tuned in the gallery. The polished floor reflected silk gowns, white gloves, jeweled combs, and the uneasy faces of guests who had stayed for music and found themselves rewarded with scandal. Margot stood near the supper-room doors with Lady Marchmont's list in hand, outwardly occupied with arrangements, inwardly measuring every glance that slid toward her and away. She had chosen a dark green gown because it was plain, respectable, and unlikely to invite comment. Comment found her anyway. Miss Vane whispered near a pillar. Lady Fenton looked troubled rather than cruel, which was not the same as courage. The Duke stood across the room, speaking to the Earl of Marchmont. He kept proper distance from Margot, and the distance hurt more because she understood its necessity. Upstairs, Felix had been settled with Nurse Pruitt. Hales stood outside the nursery corridor under direct order. Margot had seen it done. She had also seen, just before the music began, a young footman she did not recognize carry a folded note toward the back stairs. When she asked where he was going, he bowed and said the note was for the housekeeper. Yet the direction of his steps had not been toward the servants' hall. She told Hales's assistant at once. The boy went to check. He had not returned. That small absence sat beneath the evening, like a pin beneath lace. Lady Cressida entered the ballroom late. She wore silver-white silk and diamonds at her throat, every inch a duchess, every smile measured for witnesses. She did not look at Margot first. She looked at the Duke. Then she turned to Lady Marchmont and said, clearly enough for those nearby to hear, "How brave of you to continue the evening, my dear." Few hostesses would proceed after such unsettling intimacy in their house. The music faltered, then recovered. Lady Marchmont stiffened. "Your Grace, if there is a matter to discuss, perhaps not here. But here is where it has unfolded, is it not?" Lady Cressida's gaze finally found Margot. A dependent gentlewoman becomes beloved by a lonely child in a single evening. A nurse, dismissed for overfamiliarity, is restored. A duke suddenly finds virtue exactly where his son has placed affection. It is a touching tableau. One only wishes it were not so useful. The guests nearest them grew still. The humiliation Margot had anticipated in whispers had stepped into candlelight. Her hand tightened around the supper list. She felt the old impulse to shrink, but Felix's voice returned to her from the corridor. Will Miss Selwyn be sent away? If she bowed her head now, the lesson would reach him eventually. Kindness hides. Lies stand upright. She set the list on a side table and faced the Duchess. Lord Felix was lonely, and I was kind. That is the whole of my crime. A murmur passed through the room. Lady Cressida's eyes brightened. How beautifully humble. You make ambition sound like charity. No, Margot said. Suspicion does that. Miss Vane stepped closer, unable to resist the heat of the moment. Surely no one suggests Miss Selwyn intended harm. only that a lady in her position must be especially careful not to encourage attachment. Margot turned to her. A lady in my position is expected to be grateful for insult, grateful for shelter, grateful for suspicion, and grateful for the chance to disappear before powerful people become uncomfortable. I am grateful for Lady Marchmont's hospitality. I am not grateful for being called dangerous because a child trusted me. Lady Fenton lowered her eyes. Lady Marchmont's lips trembled. Lady Cressida's voice cut through the silence. You are grasping at moral superiority because it costs less than modesty. Margot felt the blow. She let the room see she felt it, then lifted her chin. I am not grasping, I am standing. The Duke moved then, not in front of her, beside her. The distinction changed the air. Your Grace, he said to his wife, you will apologize to Miss Selwyn. Lady Cressida's laugh was soft enough to chill. For defending my child from a woman who has made herself necessary. For insulting a guest in Lady Marchmont's house and using my son's distress to do it. Your son's distress seems to improve Miss Selwyn's dignity at every turn. The Duke's face became still. My son's distress has been ignored long enough because people feared the cost of naming it. Miss Selwyn did not create it. She revealed it by refusing to lie about it. Margot did not look at him. If she did, she feared the steadiness in his voice would undo hers. Lady Cressida looked around the room and understood that the first version of the story had slipped from her hands. So she changed tactics with the speed of a woman who had never survived by admitting defeat. Very well, she said. Miss Selwyn, if your sensibilities were wounded by my concern for my son, I'm sorry you found it painful. Margot met her gaze. I accept regret, Your Grace. Since none was offered, there is nothing to accept. Someone made a startled sound. It might have been Lady Marchmont. It might have been half the room. The Duke's eyes moved to Margot, and for one brief second pride broke through his restraint. Then a commotion at the far doorway shattered the room. Hales's assistant appeared, pale and breathless, his livery disordered from running. He bowed toward the Duke, then forgot the bow halfway. Your Grace, the Duke turned at once. Speak. Lord Felix is not in the nursery sitting room. Margot's body went cold. Nurse Pruitt appeared behind him, one hand at her throat, her face drained of all color. A note came, she said. It bore your name, Your Grace. It said you wished me below for Mrs. Pruitt's statement to be copied. I was gone less than 10 minutes. Lady Cressida stood perfectly still. The Duke's voice dropped. Where is my son? No one answered. Then, from the music gallery above the ballroom, beyond the carved rail and the shadowed organ screen, came a small, frightened sound. Not a scream. Not a cry meant for the room. A child's voice trying to be brave and failing. Miss Selwyn? Every face turned upward. Margot was already moving before anyone could decide whether a woman of her position was permitted to run. Margot did not remember crossing the ballroom. Later, others would say she moved too quickly for propriety, that her dark green skirt swept past dowagers, chairs, and startled footmen, as though rank itself had failed to hold her. She only remembered the sound from the music gallery, Miss Selwyn, not loud, not meant for the crowd. A child calling the one name he believed might answer before fear closed over him. The Duke was behind her within 3 strides. Hales and Nurse Pruitt followed, and the murmur of the assembly rose beneath them like water around a sinking carriage. At the foot of the gallery stairs, Lady Marchmont whispered, "Good heavens!" But Margot did not stop. The staircase curved steeply, its carved rail cold beneath her palm. Candlelight thinned as she climbed, leaving the upper passage in long shadows, broken by music stands, folded chairs, and the dark shape of the organ screen beyond the gallery rail. Felix stood behind it with valor pressed beneath his chin, and the mended lion clutched against his waist. He had not been harmed. That was Margot's first thought, and relief nearly weakened her knees. Then she saw his face. He looked worse than harmed. He looked instructed. Beside his shoe lay a folded paper, opened and smoothed once by small fingers. Margot stopped several feet away and lowered her voice. "Lord Felix, I am here." Felix's eyes filled at once. "I didn't cry downstairs." You called out. That was better. The Duke reached the top of the stairs and stopped when he saw the boy, his whole body going still with controlled dread. Nurse Pruitt made a small sound and covered her mouth. Hales took position near the stairhead to keep the curious below from flooding the gallery. Margot crouched, not touching, not crowding. May I come nearer? Felix nodded, then shook his head, then nodded again. I don't know. Then I will stay here until you do. That answer seemed to steady him. His little chest rose and fell beneath the tight line of his evening coat. The loose leg of valor clicked faintly where his fingers pressed too hard. The Duke's gaze dropped to the paper. Felix, did someone give you that note? The boy looked at him, then down. It was under the lion, in the nursery, on the chair. It said if I stayed with Nurse Pruitt, Miss Selwyn would be sent away before morning. Nurse Pruitt closed her eyes, and Margot felt every witness below become a threat, waiting to breathe. Felix swallowed. It said if I came here and was quiet, I could say goodbye first. The Duke stepped forward, but Felix shrank, not from his father exactly, but from the sudden movement. The Duke stopped at once. The self-command in that pause cost him visibly. I am not angry with you, he said. Felix's mouth trembled. I tried to be quiet. Who told you quiet would save her? The boy did not answer. Margot looked at the note on the floor. She did not pick it up. Lord Felix, secrets grow cruel in dark places. You brought this one into the light when you called my name. He stared at her. Will you go away because I called? The question struck more deeply than any insult from Lady Cressida. Below, music had died completely. The assembly waited beneath them, a county's worth of ears gathering around a child's fear. Margot kept her voice steady by sheer will. No child can make kindness wrong by needing it, but if I love people wrong, they go. The Duke flinched. There was no other word for it. Rank, restraint, and masculine control all failed for one heartbeat under that sentence. Margot saw the failure and loved him a little for allowing it to show, though she did not yet know the word for the feeling and would not have permitted it if she had. He lowered himself slowly until he was on one knee, still several feet from Felix. May I hold you? He asked. Felix looked startled by the question. Children who had been managed were rarely asked for permission. Will you be angry after? No. Will Mama be angry? The Duke's face tightened. No anger from anyone will be your burden tonight. Felix took one step, then another, and suddenly he was in his father's arms, but not fully. One hand gripped the Duke's coat. The other still held Margot's sleeve between two fingers, as if letting go of either adult might make the other vanish. The Duke did not pull him away from her. Margot did not pull herself free. For one suspended moment, the three of them formed a picture too true and too dangerous to survive witnesses. Lady Cressida's voice came from the stairs below. How exquisite. She ascended slowly, every step measured, silver-white skirts gathered in one hand. Her face was pale, but her smile had returned. A frightened child, a kneeling father, and Miss Selwyn exactly where sympathy may see her best. Hales moved as if to block her, but the Duke spoke. Do not approach him. Lady Cressida stopped on the upper landing. From below, guests had gathered at the bottom of the stairs. Lady Marchmont stood among them, white-faced. Miss Vane hovered near the newel post, hungry and afraid. Lady Fenton looked as though she wished she had been kinder earlier, which was not enough, but was something. Lady Cressida looked at the note on the floor. How convenient that the child carries evidence now. Did you provide the handwriting as well, Miss Selwyn, or only the tears? Margot rose slowly. Felix's fingers slipped from her sleeve, but his eyes stayed on her. She could feel every guest measuring her movement, every rumour waiting for a shape. Your Grace, she said, if you believe I lured your son to a dark gallery during an assembly, say so plainly. Why should I say what everyone is thinking? Because everyone may be wrong, and you have used that fact like shelter. The Duchess's eyes flashed. You grow bold when my husband stands near you. No, Margot said. I grow tired of watching a child punished for telling the truth. Lady Cressida took another step upward. The Duke's voice stopped her. Cressida. It contained no shout. It needed none. She looked past him to Felix. Darling, come here. Felix pressed closer to his father and hid valor beneath the Duke's lapel. The refusal was small, instinctive and devastating. The Duchess saw the guests see it. Whatever remained of her composure hardened into something colder. There, she said softly, there is your triumph, Miss Selwyn. My son recoils from his mother, and you stand above a ballroom dressed as Mercy. Margot shook her head. I do not want triumph. Of course not. You want only his trust, his tears, his father's. Gratitude, and a reputation polished by suffering. I want him to stop apologizing for needing love. The words broke through the gallery with such plain force that even Lady Cressida had no immediate answer. The Duke looked at Margot then, and in his eyes she saw gratitude, grief, and a fear she did not understand until he turned toward the stairs and saw the gathered crowd. Society had become the fourth person in the room. It had watched Felix in fear, watched Margot beside him, watched the Duke kneel, and watched Lady Cressida name the picture before anyone could protect it. In that instant, Alexander Arundell made a decision out of terror and called it prudence. He rose with Felix in his arms, then handed the child gently to Hales. Take him to the nursery with Mrs. Pruitt. No one enters. No one speaks to him of this until I come. Felix reached toward Margot. No, Felix, the Duke said, voice strained. You are safe. Is she? The Duke did not answer quickly enough. Margot felt the silence before he spoke. Miss Selwyn will retire from the assembly. Lady Cressida's mouth curved almost imperceptibly. Margot turned toward him. That is sensible. His voice had become formal, too formal, the kind of voice men used when they wished to hide from the wound they were making. For her protection, my carriage will take her to Bath tomorrow, with a letter clearing her conduct beyond question. The gallery seemed to tilt. Hales looked down. Nurse Pruitt whispered Felix's name as the boy began to struggle toward Margot. Lady Cressida did not move. She did not need to. Her victory had been spoken by the Duke's mouth. Margot stood very still, because if she moved too soon, she might break. My conduct does not need clearing by removing me. The Duke's face tightened. You are not being removed, no? A child is told I will be sent away if he speaks. He speaks. You send me away with better horses and better paper. I am trying to protect your name by making her threat come true. The words struck him. She saw it. Good. Let him feel it. Let every polished witness hear that a poor woman knew the difference between rescue and erasure. Felix's voice broke behind them. I made her go. Margot turned at once. No. You did not. The Duke stepped toward her. Miss Selwyn. She looked at him fully. The room vanished except for his face and the terrible earnestness in it. He meant well. That was the worst of it. Cruelty was easier to defy than mistaken protection. Your Grace, she said quietly, don't ask for my trust while proving you don't trust my strength. His expression changed, and for a moment she thought he might stop himself. Instead, he looked toward the stairwell, toward the watching guests, toward the machinery of reputation already grinding beneath them. Tomorrow, he said, one word, one sentence, one failure. Margot gathered the torn edge of her dignity around her like a shawl. I will retire from the assembly because Lord Felix is safe, and because I will not feed a spectacle. I will not leave Marchmont House tomorrow unless I choose to do so. Lady Cressida's eyes narrowed. The Duke looked at Margot as if she had stepped beyond a place he could command and into one he could only follow if he learned humility quickly enough. Margot, he said. It was the first time he used her given name. It came too late and much too softly. She felt it pass through her, warm and dangerous, then set it aside. Do not make my name another argument, Your Grace. She curtsied to Lady Marchmont below, because manners were armor even when cracked. Then she walked down the gallery stairs past the guests who had come to see her fall. No one spoke. Behind her, Felix sobbed once into Nurse Pruitt's shoulder. Behind that, Lady Cressida's silence smiled. And above all of it, Valor's loose leg clicked faintly as Hales carried the child away, like a hidden truth, still waiting for the moment when someone brave enough would finally open it. By morning, Marchmont House had dressed its shame in ordinary clothes. The ballroom floor had been swept. The music stands had been folded. The gallery door had been locked, then unlocked again at the Duke's order, because secrecy had begun to smell too much like guilt. Breakfast was served in strained quiet, though few ate enough to call it a meal. Felix remained upstairs with Nurse Pruitt and Hales outside the nursery passage. Lady Marchmont sent word that Miss Selwyn was requested in the library after 11, and Margot understood at once that requests from frightened hostesses often carried other people's decisions beneath them. She went anyway. Her trunk remained in her chamber, unopened. Her dark green gown from the assembly had been brushed and put away. She wore grey again, plain as fog, with her hair smooth and her gloves mended at the thumb. No garment in England could make a woman of no fortune safe, but neatness at least denied gossip the pleasure of disorder. The library smelled of leather, rain, and cold ashes. Lady Marchmont stood near the writing desk, with a handkerchief crushed in one hand. Lady Cressida sat beside the window in pearl-coloured silk, serene as if the previous night had been an opera she had found excessive. The Duke stood at the mantel, one hand resting against the stone, his face drawn by sleeplessness. He looked at Margot when she entered. She curtsied to Lady Marchmont first. That was her hostess. That order mattered. You sent for me, my lady. Lady Marchmont's eyes filled with distress. My dear, I hardly know how to begin. Then perhaps begin with what has already been decided. The Duke's hand closed once against the mantel. Lady Cressida smiled. You see, Lady Marchmont? Miss Selwyn has a gift for making herself central before anyone asks it of her. Margot looked at the Duchess. No, Your Grace. I have learned to hear the sound of doors being prepared to close. Lady Marchmont sank into a chair. No one wishes to be unkind. That is rarely a comfort when kindness is the name given to removal. The word entered the room and found its mark. The Duke turned fully from the mantel. Miss Selwyn, you will not be forced from this house. Then why am I here? Lady Cressida answered before he could. Because your presence has become impossible. To whom? To everyone with judgment. Margot let the insult pass. That is not an answer. Lady Cressida folded her hands. Last night, half the county saw my son reach for you in a dark gallery. My husband knelt before him, while you stood beside them, as if you had been appointed conscience to Bellhaven. You may not understand what such a picture does. Ladies of secure family are sometimes protected by context. You are protected by nothing but interpretation, and interpretation will not favor you for long. The cruelty of it was sharpened by truth. Margot knew what the guests had seen. She had felt their eyes turn a frightened child into a social weapon. She looked to the Duke. Is that your concern as well? He did not look away. Yes, the honesty hurt because it did not hide behind politeness. And your remedy, time, that is not a remedy. It is a room with the door shut. His jaw tightened. I have sent inquiries to Ravenmere. Mrs. Pruitt is restored. Hales is tracing the false notes. The child is not unguarded now. If you withdraw to Bath for 1 week, with my letter to your aunt and Lady Marchmont's confirmation that you leave honoured, I may quiet the immediate scandal and gather proof without your name being dragged through every supper table in Hampshire. Lady Cressida's eyes gleamed. You see how reasonable he can be when pity does not cloud him. Margot ignored her. The Duke's plan was not cruel. That made it more dangerous. Cruelty could be refused cleanly. Concern came dressed as sacrifice and asked to be thanked. Your Grace, Margot said, do you remember what the note told Felix? He closed his eyes for 1 second. Yes. It told him that if he stayed where he was loved, I would be sent away. It told him silence could save me. He called out, and now you propose that I go. Not because he called out. That is not what he will hear. I will explain it to him. Adults have explained him into fear for months. The Duke went still. Lady Marchmont whispered, Margot. Margot turned to her gently. My lady, I know you wish the house restored to peace, but peace bought by teaching a child that truth removes the people he trusts is only quiet. It is not peace. Lady Cressida rose. This is intolerable. Margot faced her. Yes, it has been intolerable for Lord Felix far longer than it has been inconvenient for us. Colour rose in the Duchess's face. You speak as though you own his suffering. No, I speak as one of the few adults who has not tried to profit from denying it. The Duke made a slight movement, almost warning, almost admiration. Margot did not look at him. If she did, the ache in her chest might become too visible. You want a week, she said to him. A week in which I am absent. A week in which Lady Cressida may tell Felix I left for my own good, for his good, for everyone's good. By the time I return, if I am permitted to return, the lesson will have settled. Love goes away. Truth costs comfort. A woman without standing must disappear so the powerful may arrange themselves. The Duke's voice roughened. I am trying not to see you ruined. I know that was the cruelest truth. But you are asking me to make your choice easier because you cannot yet bear the cost of making it openly. Silence followed. Lady Marchmont looked down at her handkerchief. Lady Cressida turned toward her husband with triumph carefully hidden beneath concern. Alexander, she has answered you. She prefers drama to protection. No, Margot said. I prefer choice. Lady Cressida laughed softly. Choice. What a luxurious word for someone dependent on other people's roofs. Margot felt that strike the old wound directly. For years she had been passed between rooms, invitations, and relatives' needs. She had been useful enough to keep and inconvenient enough to dismiss. No one had called it cruelty. They had called it arrangement. She straightened. That is exactly why I will not let others spend the word for me. A small sound came from the doorway. All four adults turned. Felix stood there in his dark morning suit, valor tucked beneath one arm and the mended lion held under the other. Nurse Pruitt was behind him, pale with alarm, one hand hovering near his shoulder. I tried to stop him, Your Grace, she said. He heard voices. Felix looked only at his father. You said she was under your protection. The Duke's face changed. Felix, you said safe. Felix looked at Margot, then back at him. Then why does safe look like going away? No one moved. Lady Cressida's lips parted, but the Duke lifted one hand without looking at her, and she stopped. Felix stepped inside the library. Valor's loose leg clicked faintly. I don't want to choose wrong again. Margot's heart twisted. Lord Felix, you did not choose wrong. Then why do people leave after I speak? The Duke crossed the room, then stopped before he came too near. He lowered himself to one knee. This time it was not a gesture for witnesses. It was a man lowering himself beneath the weight of his own failure. Because adults made wrong choices around you. Felix's eyes searched his face. Are you making one now? The question laid the room bare. The Duke looked from Felix to Margot, then to Nurse Pruitt, then finally to Lady Cressida, who stood rigid by the window. He seemed to see, all at once, the shape beneath every event. Nurse Pruitt removed after love was named. Toys hidden after comfort was trusted. Margot nearly removed after truth was spoken. His own protection had become the same lesson in finer gloves. When he spoke, his voice had lost its polish. Yes, Lady Cressida drew in a sharp breath. Felix stared at him. The Duke continued, each word chosen as if it cut him to choose it. I was making the wrong choice and calling it prudence, Felix whispered. Then choose better. Lady Marchmont began to cry silently. Margot could not move. The Duke rose, but his eyes remained on his son. I will. He turned to Margot. Miss Selwyn will not be sent away. Not by my carriage, not by Lady Marchmont's embarrassment. Not by your mother's fear. If she leaves this house, it will be because she chooses to leave it. Felix's lower lip trembled. Promise. The Duke looked at Margot then, and the promise widened until it included the dignity he had almost taken from her. I promise. Relief moved through Felix so quickly he swayed. Nurse Pruitt steadied him. Lady Cressida spoke at last, her voice low and dangerous. You have lost all judgment? No, the Duke said. I have discovered what judgment has cost my son when I delayed using it. Margot drew a careful breath. Then there must be terms. Lady Cressida gave a disbelieving sound. Terms? The Duke did not look offended. Name them. Margot's hands were cold inside her gloves, but her voice held. Lord Felix is not to be told by anyone that my presence depends upon his silence or conduct. Nurse Pruitt remains with him. I will not be alone with him behind closed doors, nor placed in any position that can be turned into scandal. Any conversation involving me and Lord Felix must have open doors or witnesses. And if my name is attacked publicly, it is defended publicly, not with hints, not with private gratitude. Publicly. Lady Marchmont looked up through her tears. Lady Cressida's face became almost expressionless. The Duke bowed his head, agreed. Margot met his eyes. One more. Yes, do not protect me again by erasing me. The words struck him harder than reproach. Agreed, he said quietly. Felix looked between them, uncertain but breathing more easily. Then Hales appeared at the library door with a sealed letter in his hand and weather on his coat, as if he had come from the outer hall at speed. Your Grace, a messenger from Ravenmere Abbey. Urgent. The Duke took the letter and broke the seal. Margot watched his eyes move over the page. Whatever he read took the last colour from his face. What is it? Lady Marchmont whispered. He lowered the letter slowly. The steward writes that the nursery wing at Ravenmere was cleared under Her Grace's instructions 2 days before we came to Marchmont House. Lady Cressida did not move. Felix clutched Valour tighter. The Duke's voice dropped. And the nursery portrait of Lady Cressida holding Felix as an infant is missing from the wall. The missing portrait did not make a sound, yet it seemed to fall through the library like something heavy dropped from a height. Felix looked from his father to his mother, his small face tightening around a question too large for him. The picture with the blue chair, he whispered. Lady Cressida's lashes lowered. That tiny delay answered before she did. Old portraits are often moved for cleaning. The Duke held the steward's letter in one hand, but his eyes did not leave his wife. The steward writes that the frame was removed from the nursery wall, under your written instruction, and sent to Greyford House, not to the restorer, not to the housekeeper's store. To your sister's London house. Lady Marchmont sank slowly into the chair behind her. Nurse Pruitt drew nearer to Felix but waited for him to choose. Margot stood beside the writing table, aware of it. The torn drawing folded in her reticule, the blue thread wrapped in a place card, and the way truth had begun to gather objects, because words alone had been too easily bent. Lady Cressida gave a thin smile. Greyford House has better storage. For a portrait you never mentioned removing, the Duke asked. Must every nursery alteration be submitted for a committee vote now? No. Only those made after you hid a box, dismissed a nurse, intercepted letters, planted insinuations against Miss Selwyn, and frightened my son into believing affection causes exile. The Duchess looked toward Felix. Your father grows dramatic when supplied with an audience. Felix did not smile. He held Valour so tightly that the little loose leg clicked under his fingers. Margot saw him flinch at the sound, as if even the toy had spoken out of turn. She stepped forward before the room could swallow him. Lord Felix should not be required to hear adults argue over what was written from his wall. Lady Cressida turned on her. Do not instruct my household. I am not instructing it, Your Grace. I am asking that he be spared what should have been spared to him long ago. The Duke looked at Nurse Pruitt. Take him to the schoolroom. Hales will stand outside the door. Felix reached for neither nurse nor father at once. His eyes found Margot. Will you still be here? She lowered herself to his height, leaving space between them. Yes. I have given my word for today, and today is not finished. Truth makes people angry. It can. But anger is not stronger than truth. Once enough honest people stand near it. He considered this solemnly. Are there enough? Margot glanced at the Duke, then at Lady Marchmont, whose hand trembled, but who did not look away. There will be, she said. Felix allowed Nurse Pruitt to guide him from the room. At the door he paused. Papa. The Duke's face softened. Yes, don't let the picture be lost. The Duke's voice thickened by the smallest degree. I won't. When the door closed, Lady Cressida's composure slipped. Not far. Only enough for the woman beneath the Duchess to show, and the sight was not softer. It was rawer. You all speak as if that portrait were sacred. The Duke folded the steward's letter once. It was part of his nursery. It was a lie. No one answered. The confession had come too quickly to be recalled. Lady Cressida looked toward the window, where rain had begun to find the glass. It was painted when he was an infant. Everyone praised it. The tender young Duchess with her son, the perfect heir, the perfect mother. They hung it where every servant could see what I was expected to be. Nurse Pruitt would carry him past it and tell him, "There is Mama." He reached for the painted woman more readily than the living one. The Duke stood very still. He was a baby. And then he was a boy who quieted for servants, smiled for nurses, trusted every soft voice in the room except mine. "So you removed them." "I removed confusion. You removed comfort." Lady Cressida's eyes flashed. "You were not there to know the difference." The blow landed. The Duke did not deny it. That gave it weight. Margot watched him absorb the charge without using his rank as shield, and respect returned despite her caution. "You are right," he said. "I was absent too often. I permitted reports to stand in place of presence. I left my son vulnerable to whatever you chose to call discipline." Lady Cressida's mouth trembled, then hardened. "Do not turn your guilt into my trial. I am not avoiding my guilt. I am refusing to let it excuse yours." Lady Marchmont lifted her head then. Until that moment, she had looked like a hostess trapped under the ruin of her own hospitality. Now something steadier entered her face. "This cannot remain private." Lady Cressida turned on her. "You would involve yourself in Bellhaven affairs. You involved my house when Miss Selwyn was insulted in my drawing-room, and again in my ballroom." Lady Marchmont's voice shook, but it did not break. "Last night, guests heard enough to repeat what they please. If falsehood was public, correction must not be hidden." Margot looked at her with quiet surprise. Courage, arriving late, was still courage. The Duke nodded once. "There will be a correction before the remaining guests depart." Lady Cressida laughed softly. "A husband correcting his wife for the sake of a poor relation. Do you hear yourself?" Margot felt the familiar heat of accusation approach. This time the Duke looked to her before answering, asking without words whether she wished him to speak. The restraint mattered more than defense. "Facts only, Your Grace," Margot said. "Not praise. Not gratitude that can be twisted into preference. Say that Lord Felix was not coached, Mrs. Pruitt was wrongfully dismissed, and I was unjustly accused. Nothing more. And if facts are not enough," he asked, "they must be. Facts are all I can afford." For a moment, the room narrowed to the space between them. Lady Cressida saw it, and her face regained its elegant cruelty. "How noble! She even edits your chivalry." Margot did not look at her. The Duke did. "No. She limits my power where I should have done so myself." That silenced even the Duchess. By late afternoon, the remaining guests had been gathered in the smaller drawing room. Not the ballroom, because Lady Marchmont refused to turn correction into entertainment. The doors were open. Hales stood beyond one, not as threat but as barrier against servants being blamed later for what their betters chose to hear. Lady Fenton sat rigid near the fire. Miss Vane stood behind her chair, pale and resentful, no longer eager now that scandal had begun to demand account from those who carried it. Margot stood beside Lady Marchmont, neither hidden nor displayed. Lady Cressida took her place near the mantel, with the beauty of a woman determined to look wronged if she could not look innocent. The Duke entered last. He carried no papers. He did not need them. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I regret the disturbance my household has brought into Lady Marchmont's house. I will speak plainly and only once. Last night Miss Selwyn was insulted before witnesses. My son's distress was used to support that insult. That correction must be made before the same witnesses, or as many as remain." Lady Fenton lowered her eyes. Miss Vane pressed her lips together. The Duke continued. "Miss Selwyn did not encourage my son to call her by any improper name. She did not seek influence over him. She did not create disorder in my household. She noticed fear where others, including myself, had failed to look closely enough. She answered a child with kindness and truth." Lady Cressida's fan stopped moving. Margot kept her gaze on the carpet because his words were dangerously near praise and yet not false. "Mrs. Pruitt, formerly my son's nurse, was dismissed after objecting to the correction of natural affection. Her letters did not reach me. A nursery box containing my son's belongings was removed. A portrait of Lady Cressida holding Felix as an infant was taken from his nursery wall without my knowledge. These matters are being addressed under my authority. Lady Cressida smiled. How efficiently you arrange grief into household minutes. The Duke turned to her. I arrange it because disorder has served you too well. A murmur moved through the room. Lady Marchmont's hand tightened once around Margot's, then released it at once, because even comfort required care. Miss Vane, unable to bear silence, said, "Surely no one here meant to damage Miss Selwyn. Concern can be mistaken when emotions are high." Margot looked at her. "Concern asks questions before carrying stories." Miss Vane coloured. Lady Fenton spoke, surprising herself as much as anyone. The marked paper should not have been brought room to room. It was not a full apology. It was a crack in the wall. Lady Cressida heard it and stepped forward. "You are all very eager to believe a dependent woman because it flatters you to call yourselves just. What will you believe when she is installed at Ravenmere as the saint of the nursery? What will you say when my son prefers her, when my husband listens to her, when every old failure in my house becomes her ladder?" Margot lifted her head. "You keep calling kindness a ladder because possession is the only height you trust." The Duchess's eyes sharpened. "You will not keep what is mine." The words exposed too much. The room heard it. So did the Duke. Margot's answer came softly, but it reached every corner. "Children are not possessions." Lady Cressida's face went white beneath its careful powder. The Duke stepped beside Margot, not before her. "My son will not be used to punish Miss Selwyn, Mrs. Pruitt, or me for wounds you refuse to name honestly." "And you?" Lady Cressida asked. "Will you name yours honestly before this room? Will you admit that admiration has made you foolish?" Margot felt the trap open. The Duke did not enter it. "I will admit I was absent. I will admit I mistook quiet reports for proof of peace. I will admit I nearly repeated the household's error by sending Miss Selwyn away, to spare myself the sight of conflict. She refused me, and she was right. That confession struck harder than any defense. It made Margot's throat ache. It also left Lady Cressida no easy scandal to hold up, because humility did not glitter the way impropriety did. From the hall came quick footsteps. Nurse Pruitt appeared at the open door, breathless but not panicked. Felix stood beside her, valor in both hands. "Forgive me, Your Grace," Nurse Pruitt said. "He found it when we tried to mend the loose leg." Felix held out a narrow folded paper, yellowed and tightly rolled. "Papa," he said, his voice small but clear enough for the room to hear. "Valor had a letter inside." Felix stood in the drawing-room doorway, with Valor held out, as if the little wooden horse had become heavier than a toy should ever be. The tightly rolled paper lay across his palm, yellowed by years, inside the hollow space of the loosened leg, and Nurse Pruitt kept one hand near his shoulder without taking his choice from him. No one in the room spoke. Lady Cressida's fan had stopped entirely. Miss Vane stared at the paper with the sickened fascination of someone who had carried gossip and suddenly seen where gossip ended. The Duke crossed the room slowly, then lowered himself before Felix, so the boy did not have to surrender the letter upward like tribute. "May I take it?" he asked. Felix nodded. "Nurse Pruitt said Valor asked to be mended today." His small voice trembled. When the leg came loose, the paper was inside. The Duke accepted it with both hands. Margot noticed that he did not unfold it at once. He first looked at his son. "Whatever this says, you are not at fault for finding it." Felix swallowed. "Even if it makes Mama angry." Lady Cressida moved. "Felix, give that to me." The Duke stood. "No." One word, quiet and absolute. The Duchess's face went pale beneath its powder. "Alexander, that paper was hidden inside a child's toy. It may be some servant's mischief. Then it will be read and known as such. Not here." Her voice sharpened. "Not before these people." Margot watched the phrase strike the room. These people. Lady Marchmont, Lady Fenton, Miss Vane, servants beyond the door, a poor relation near the writing table, and a child whose fear had at last gathered enough witnesses to stop being private. Lady Marchmont rose, shaking but upright. The accusation against Miss Selwyn was made in my house before my guests. The correction will be heard here. The Duke unfolded the paper. The creases were stiff. For a moment, his eyes moved over the lines, and whatever remained of guarded hope in him vanished. He looked older when he began to read. Pruitt must go before the boy forgets himself entirely. He clings to her, cries for her, and has begun to use a word that should belong to me, though I cannot bear the sound of it from him. If he learns that those he loves are removed when he names them, he will become obedient. Let the wooden toys remain long enough for him to associate comfort with loss. The horse may soothe him until it teaches him. I will not be made a stranger in my own nursery by a servant, a painted ghost, or a child who prefers softness to blood. The last word seemed to leave smoke in the air. Nurse Pruitt closed her eyes. Lady Fenton's hand moved to her throat. Miss Vane looked down as if the carpet had become safer than any face. Felix stood very still. He did not understand every sentence, but children understood the climate of truth before adults finished arguing over grammar. "You wanted me to think love goes away," he said. Lady Cressida's face broke for one instant, not into remorse but into injured fury. "I wanted you strong." "No," the Duke said. "You wanted him afraid." She turned on him. "And you wanted him convenient. You cannot read my shame like scripture now, and pretend you did not leave me in that nursery with every eye waiting to see whether tenderness would bloom on command." The Duke did not flinch away from the accusation. "I failed you by absence. I failed him by trusting quiet reports, but my failure is not a cloak for yours." The Duchess's mouth trembled. "You all loved the picture of me better than me." Margot felt the room waver toward pity. She felt it in herself too, unwelcome and human. Lady Cressida had not lied about pain. She had lied with it. That was the difference. Margot stepped forward before pity could become excuse. "Your pain was real, Your Grace. So was his. You made a child answer for yours." Lady Cressida looked at her with hatred, sharpened by humiliation. "And you are what? His savior? His borrowed mother?" The noble witness who rose from one trunk and a grey gown. The old insult found no entrance this time. Margot's hands were cold, but her voice was clear. "I am a witness." The simplicity of it held the room. She continued because stopping now would give the lie a place to breathe. "I witnessed Lord Felix afraid to speak kindly. I witnessed Mrs. Pruitt return without triumph and with proof. I witnessed Your Grace turn suspicion into a weapon, because kindness could not be controlled. You may call me nothing if you like." Powerful people often call others nothing when they cannot make them silent. Lady Marchmont took one step nearer Margot. "Miss Selwyn was wronged in my house. It was not a grand declaration. It was stronger for that." Lady Fenton rose next, pale with embarrassment. "I repeated concern too readily. I regret it." Miss Vane's apology came stiffly, with pride fighting every word. "I carried what I should have questioned. Miss Selwyn, I was unjust." Margot inclined her head. She did not absolve them with warmth they had not earned. Acknowledgement was enough for today. The Duke folded the letter from Valor and placed it beside Nurse Pruitt's copies, the marked scandal sheets, and the steward's notice from Ravenmere. The objects of truth lay together at last. "Lady Cressida," he said, and the use of her title rather than her name made the sentence final. "You will leave Marchmont House tomorrow for Greyford House with your maid and companion. My solicitor will prepare a deed of separation and a settled allowance appropriate to your rank. You will maintain a separate establishment. You will not enter the nursery at Ravenmere Abbey or approach Felix without my invitation and without company until such time as he may receive you without fear. Any letter to him will pass through me or Mrs. Pruitt until he is ready to read it." Lady Cressida stared at him. "You would reduce your wife to supervised visits like a governess dismissed for temper. No, I preserve your dignity more than you preserved his peace. Society will feast on this. Society will. Be told that you have retired to Greyford House for your health, after a period of domestic strain. That is kinder than truth, and less than mercy would be if Felix were not listening. Felix looked from his father to his mother. Can I still miss her? The question undid every adult in the room more surely than accusation. Lady Cressida's face changed, but she did not speak. Margot knelt before Felix. Yes. Missing someone does not mean what they did was right. Being safe does not mean you must hate. Tears finally slipped down his cheeks. Will you go too? There it was, the fear beneath all the rest. Margot had known this moment would come, and still it hurt as if unprepared. Yes, she said gently. Tomorrow I will go to Bath for a little while. Felix recoiled. The Duke turned toward her sharply. Miss Selwyn, she did not look away from the child. Not because you called my name, not because you loved wrongly, not because anyone sends me. I am choosing it so that you may see the difference. Felix shook his head. Choosing still goes away. It can. But choosing can also write. Choosing can return properly. Choosing tells the truth before it leaves. The Duke's face was drawn, but he understood before she explained. Margot continued, You have Nurse Pruitt. You have your father awake at last. I will not stay where every kindness can be twisted into another chain around you. I will go with my name defended, and I will write if your father permits. The Duke's voice was rough. I permit it. Felix wiped his face with the back of his hand. Will Valor know? Margot looked at the little horse. Valor has kept a secret for years. I think he will understand patience. The boy held the toy close. The Duke turned to the room. Miss Selwyn leaves Marchmont House with Bellhaven's gratitude, protection, and respect. Anyone who suggests otherwise will say it to me first. No one answered. Silence had changed sides. Later, when Lady Cressida had withdrawn, and the guests had scattered into subdued corners, Margot found the library nearly dark, except for one lamp beside the writing table. The Duke stood there with the mended lion, the torn drawing, and Valor's letter laid before him. He looked less like a duke than a man facing the cost of arriving late to his own child's life. You should not have to leave, he said. No, I nearly made the very lesson I swore to undo. Yes, he accepted the answer without defense. That mattered. Tell me how to do better. The question was plain, stripped of command. Margot folded the two halves of Felix's torn drawing and placed them beside the lion. Begin with him. Not with guilt that asks him to comfort you. With presents, breakfasts, bedtime questions, asking before touching, staying when tears are inconvenient. And with you, her breath caught. The open library door, the lamp, the distance between them, and the whole law of England stood inside that question. He remained a married man, though no longer a husband in household. She remained a woman who would not build a future upon another woman's ruin. Yet something true had been born between them, not from scandal, but from moral recognition. With me, she said carefully, begin with patience. His eyes softened. Then patience. She placed the mended lion upright over the torn seam of the drawing. Do not hide the tear from Felix. Let him see it held together. The Duke touched the paper with reverence. Safe, he read, voice low. Margot turned toward the door before tears could make leaving less honorable. Miss Selwyn, he said. She stopped. Yes, Your Grace. You were never nothing. The words met the oldest wound in her and did not heal it all at once. They did something better. They told the wound it had been seen. She did not look back, because if she did, she might forget why leaving mattered. Neither was he, she said, and walked out beneath the watching portraits with her name still her own. Bath received Margot Selwyn with rain on the pavements, lavender in her aunt's narrow hall, and one letter arriving every Thursday under the Bellhaven seal. The first letter was not from the Duke. It was from Felix, written in large uneven lines that climbed and fell across the page, as if the words themselves were learning courage. Valor's leg has a brass pin now. Papa said, mended things don't have to pretend. The lion guards the window. I cried once, and Nurse Pruitt said tears don't dismiss people. I didn't say sorry after, except once, but Papa said I might practice not saying it. Margot read the letter at the small breakfast table in Sydney Place, while her aunt pretended not to watch. For 3 weeks, she answered with equal care. never writing too warmly, never coldly enough to make fear sound correct. She told Felix that brave did not mean silent. She told him that leaving with truth was not the same as being sent away. She told him valor had been patient for years, and patient things often understood more than people supposed. Letters from the Duke came folded separately, proper, clear, and restrained. Lady Cressida had gone to Greyford House with her maid and companion. His solicitor had begun the deed of separation and arranged a settled allowance. Nurse Pruitt had returned to Ravenmere Abbey under his direct authority. The nursery portrait of Lady Cressida, holding Felix as an infant, had been recovered from Greyford House and sent to be cleaned before returning to the nursery wall. He wrote nothing improper. He asked nothing he had no right to ask. That restraint should have made the letters easier to hold. It did not. It made them more difficult, because Margot had known many men who could speak beautifully under feeling, but very few who could govern feeling out of respect. On the fourth Thursday, no letter came. Instead, a footman brought 2 cards to her aunt's door at 11 o'clock in the morning. One belonged to Alexander Arundell, Duke of Bellhaven. The other, printed smaller and held with great pride by its owner, belonged to Lord Felix Arundell. Margot saw them from the upper window before her aunt called. Felix stood on the pavement in a dark coat, one hand holding valor, the other guarding the mended lion in his pocket. Nurse Pruitt waited beside the carriage. The Duke stood near the steps, hat in hand, severe as ever, but when his gaze lifted toward the window, Margot stepped back with a hand against her heart. In the drawing-room, propriety did everything it could. It arranged chairs, tea, open doors, and an aunt with knitting needles sharp enough to defend a niece's reputation against any title in England. Emotion entered anyway. Felix bowed first because he had clearly been commanded to do so, then forgot the second half of ceremony and crossed the room. He stopped before Margot, eyes solemn. "May I?" The question nearly broke her composure. "Yes," she said. "You may." He embraced her waist carefully, not desperately, and she rested one hand on his shoulder. It was not replacement. It was not claim. It was recognition with permission. When he drew back, he held up valor. A fine brass pin secured the loosened leg. "Papa said we mustn't hide the mend." Margot looked at the Duke. "A sound rule, a late one," he said. Her aunt made a small noise that might have been approval. Felix took a folded paper from inside his coat. "I made a house picture." Margot opened it. Ravenmere Abbey stood under a broad sky, with a boy, a tall man, Nurse Pruitt, and a woman in a green gown near the window. Above the door, in careful letters, he had written, "Home has room." Margot's throat tightened. "It is a beautiful house picture. It isn't only a nursery one," Felix said. "Papa says houses have to learn too." The Duke looked toward the tea table, then back to Margot. "Houses cannot apologize. People can." Her aunt's knitting stilled. He continued, with the door open and every word honorable because it did not hide. "Miss Selwyn, I came to say what letters could not say properly. At Marchmont House, I nearly repeated the lesson that injured my son. I mistook removing you for protecting you. You were right to refuse me." Margot held his gaze. "I was angry. You were clear." "I needed clear." Felix had gone to show Nurse Pruitt that he had drawn the chimney smoke too high, and Margot's aunt, with unexpected kindness, asked the nurse about the journey. The Duke remained across the room, no closer than propriety allowed. "Ravenmere writes to you because my son asked whether honorable leaving could still leave a path back. I told him only you could answer that. And what does your grace ask? That he may continue to write with your aunt's permission. That I may call when proper, never privately, never without respect for the boundaries you named. That Ravenmere may someday receive you as a guest under circumstances no one can stain." The future opened quietly, not as proposal, not as promise stolen from another woman's legal place. As patience, as a door not forced. Margot looked at Felix, who had placed valor and the lion together on the carpet, so neither guarded alone. "With my aunt's permission," she said. Her aunt lifted her knitting. "My permission depends upon open doors, good sense, and no nonsense from people who believe dukedoms excuse carelessness. For the first time, the Duke laughed. The sound was brief, low, and surprised to exist. Felix turned at once. Papa laughed. Margot smiled. So he did. Felix nodded with satisfaction. Ravensmere is getting better. 6 months later, Lady Marchmont invited only 12 guests to a small autumn dinner in Hampshire, and no music was played before Truth had finished speaking. Margot came with her aunt. The Duke arrived with Felix and Nurse Pruitt. Lady Cressida remained at Greyford House, where her dignity was preserved, her allowance settled, and her power over the nursery ended. No one sensible called that happiness. It was consequence, and consequence was sometimes the most mercy Truth could offer before dinner. Lady Marchmont stood in the drawing-room, where whispers had once sharpened around Margot's name. Her hands trembled, but she did not sit. Miss Selwyn was wronged in my house, she said. She was suspected where she should have been trusted, and I lacked courage when courage was required sooner. Lady Fenton rose next. I repeated concern too readily and mistook caution for fairness. Miss Selwyn, I regret it. Miss Vane's apology was pale and stiff, but spoken where others could hear. I carried what I should have questioned. I was unjust. No one applauded. Applause would have made a performance of pain. This was better. Witnessed correction. Plain words. A name returned in the room where it had been endangered. Felix stood beside Margot with Valor tucked beneath one arm and the lion in his pocket. He slipped his hand into hers and whispered. They said it where everyone could hear. Margot squeezed his fingers once. Yes, that's how truth gets warm. She looked down at him, startled. Who taught you that? He nodded toward his father. Across the room, the Duke watched them with a steadiness that no longer made Margot feel like evidence. It made her feel seen. After dinner, Felix asked to show her the restored portrait, which had been brought from Ravensmere for final cleaning before returning home. It hung in the long gallery, newly framed but not hidden. Lady Cressida in white sat beside a blue chair with infant Felix in her arms. She looked young, beautiful, and unsmiling. Felix studied it with the seriousness of a boy allowed to ask true questions. She looked sad. Yes, Margot said. Was she bad? Margot knelt beside him. She did wrong things, very wrong. But people are not only one word, even when the word is true. Felix looked at the painted face. I can be safe and still miss her. Yes, the Duke, standing a few steps away with both gallery doors open, closed his eyes for one moment. Felix placed Valor beneath the portrait, just for a breath, then picked him up again. He remembers kindness, he said, and ran ahead to show Nurse Pruitt the lion's pocket throne at the supper table. Margot remained in the gallery with the Duke, lamplight between them, distance proper, silence full. You gave him permission to love without fear, he said. No, I reminded him. You are teaching him to believe it. His gaze rested on her, warm and governed. And you? I am learning that being seen need not mean being consumed. He bowed over her hand without lifting it to his lips. Respect, not claim. Then I will keep looking carefully. Years later, Felix would remember 2 dinners, one where fear spoke by accident, and one where truth was invited to stay. Margot would remember Lady Marchmont's trembling apology, Felix's hand in hers, and the Duke beside her, rather than before her. She had entered their lives as a woman society could dismiss with a phrase. She remained something no phrase could erase. A witness, a friend, a future held patiently in honourable hands, and in the nursery at Ravensmere Abbey, beneath the restored portrait, and beside the window guarded by a wooden lion, Valor stood with his brass-mended leg in the morning light, proof that what had been hidden could be found, what had been broken could be held together, and what had once been called a mistake could become the beginning of home.